The hum of the engines was a constant, comforting rhythm that Aelrin had come to equate with home. He stood on the bridge of the Stargazer, his gaze fixed on the swirling nebula outside the viewport. For the last 3 rotations, their journey had been smooth, a steady course through the galactic trade lanes. Aelrin, a stoic member of the Xylosian race, relished the predictable routine. The Xylosians, known for their practicality and meticulousness, found solace in the predictability of their trade routes. Any disruptions to the established order were viewed with suspicion, a testament to their deep-seated distrust of the unpredictable nature of the galaxy. Aelrin's first mate, Kiara, a young and ambitious member of the HFY, was pacing the bridge. Her antennae twitched nervously, betraying her anxiety. Aelrin, with his characteristic patience, waited for her to speak. "Captain, a distress call," Kiara announced, her voice tinged with worry. "It's coming from a human freighter." Aelrin's brow furrowed. Humans, with their volatile tendencies and unpredictable nature, were not welcomed on Xylosian ships. Their history, he knew, was filled with tales of human pirates and raiders who preyed on unsuspecting travelers. Their reputation as a species with a penchant for violence and chaos had followed them across the stars. "They're out of range," he stated flatly, his voice betraying no emotion. "We continue on course." "But the distress signal, it sounds urgent." "Captain," Kiara insisted, her voice laced with unease. "Perhaps we could investigate." Aelrin's gaze remained fixed on the nebula beyond the viewport. "Their distress is not our concern." Kiara's antennae twitched again. She recognized the stiffening of Aelrin's posture, a sign of his unwavering adherence to the Xylosian code of practicality and safety. However, her own sense of justice, a trait ingrained in her HFY upbringing, urged her to act. "But Captain," Kiara pressed, "we are traders. Helping those in need is part of our code too." Aelrin turned to face his first mate, his sapphire eyes a deep, unreadable blue. "The trade lanes are not a charitable venture," he said, his voice firm. "We have a cargo to deliver and a reputation to uphold. We do not interfere with affairs that do not concern us." Kiara hesitated, her own internal battle between duty and prudence evident in her silence. Before she could respond, a second distress signal filled the ship, this time a piercing siren that sent a shiver down the spine of every crew member. "Aelrin, it's a coded signal," Narak, the ship's engineer, announced from his station. "It's a trap." The veteran Xylosian, Narak, was a seasoned engineer known for his practical wisdom and cynical wit. His voice held a quiet but palpable sense of dread. Aelrin's face hardened. He knew it. Humans, always cunning, always calculating. He had experienced their treachery firsthand in his youth, watching his own father's ship swallowed by a human pirate's ambush. The memory of the betrayal, the fear, and the desperate fight for survival still haunted him to this day. The Stargazer's sensors detected a massive shadow emerging from the nebula. A ship, sleek and menacing, its silhouette sharp and angular, unlike any Xylosian craft Aelrin had ever seen. It was a human ship, bristling with weapons, a predator stalking its prey. "It's the Butcher," Narak growled, his voice thick with fear. Aelrin's heart pounded in his chest, a primal fear taking root in his gut. The Butcher, a human pirate, infamous throughout the trade lanes, a specter of terror whispered in hushed tones amongst the Xylosian traders. Aelrin knew he had to act fast. His mind raced, calculating the odds, the dangers, the consequences of their encounter. But the decision was already made. He could not outrun this predator, he could not hide from its fury. He could only face it. "Prepare for attack," Aelrin ordered, his voice firm despite the tremor in his gut. "All hands to stations." As the human ship drew closer, its shadow encompassing the Stargazer, Aelrin gazed out at the nebula beyond the viewport, a storm brewing in his mind, the fear of the Butcher's shadow eclipsing the beauty of the stars. He knew, deep down, that this was no ordinary encounter. This was a fight for their lives. This was a confrontation with the darkness that lurked within the human soul, and this time the odds were stacked against them. The stench of burnt circuitry and ozone hung heavy in the air, a reminder of the brutal efficiency with which the Butcher had taken control of their ship. Aelrin, his 6 eyes narrowed in a perpetual scowl, watched as the human pirate, his face shadowed by the flickering light of a console, issued orders to his crew in a language that sounded like gravel grinding against metal. "They're setting up a perimeter," Kiara whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the ship's auxiliary power. They were huddled together in the cramped confines of the ship's engineering bay, a makeshift refuge from the chaos engulfing the rest of the vessel. Narak, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by a stoic grimness, adjusted the wires leading to the backup power system. "They're not taking any chances with us, Captain," he said, his voice raspy. "They're sealing off every access point, isolating us." Aelrin's mandibles twitched in agitation. "They won't get away with this," he muttered, his voice heavy with a mixture of anger and fear. "We'll fight back." "But how?" Kiara asked, her voice trembling. "There are too many of them, and they're armed with weapons we've never seen before." Aelrin looked at Kiara, his face contorted with a mix of frustration and concern. "We need to be smart, Kiara," he said, his tone softening slightly. "We need to think like they do." "Think like humans?" Kiara scoffed. "You want me to think like a creature that revels in violence and destruction?" "It's not about thinking like a human, Kiara," Aelrin said, his voice firm. "It's about understanding them, their weaknesses, their strategies. Only then can we find a way to survive." The air crackled with tension as they listened to the sounds of the Butcher's crew moving through the ship, their footsteps heavy and deliberate, their voices a constant reminder of their overwhelming presence. "They're running a sweep," Narak said, his eyes glued to a monitor displaying the ship's surveillance systems. "They're coming this way." Aelrin's gaze darted to the sealed door leading out of the engineering bay. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." Kiara, her initial fear replaced by a surge of adrenaline, grabbed a tool from the workbench. "Captain, follow me," she shouted, leading the way through a labyrinth of pipes and cables, their escape route a desperate gamble. As they scrambled through the dark, claustrophobic tunnels, Kiara could hear the muffled sounds of footsteps approaching. She felt a wave of panic wash over her, but she kept pushing, her heart pounding in her chest. "They're getting closer," she shouted, her breath catching in her throat. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic clang echoed through the tunnel as the Butcher's crew breached the door leading into the engineering bay. Kiara threw herself into a small, narrow space, pulling Aelrin and Narak with her. They were hidden behind a wall of machinery, the metallic smell of coolant and burning oil filling their nostrils. "They're coming," Narak hissed, his voice tight. Kiara pressed her hand against his arm, silencing him. They held their breath, their bodies tense, as the footsteps drew closer. The human crew, their voices gruff and menacing, searched the engineering bay, their flashlights illuminating the surrounding machinery. "There's nowhere for them to go," one of them said, his voice dripping with disdain. "They're trapped like rats." Kiara gripped the tool in her hand, her knuckles white. This was their chance. As the human crew moved past their hiding place, Kiara sprang into action. She jumped out, her tool flashing in the dim light, striking the unsuspecting pirate in the back of the head. The human tumbled to the floor, unconscious. Kiara turned to Narak, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and triumph. "We have to get out of here," she said, her voice trembling with exertion. "Now." Aelrin, his face hardened with determination, followed close behind her. They had taken the first step in their fight for survival. The Butcher, in his hubris, had underestimated them. They were not the prey. They were the hunters now. The pulsating red light of the alarm panel illuminated Kiara's face, her normally vibrant green scales appearing pale in its glow. The air thrummed with the high-pitched whine of the ship's emergency systems, a discordant symphony against the background hum of the engines. "They're breaching the cargo bay," Narak announced, his voice a gravelly rasp. He stood hunched over a console, his long, gray fingers dancing across the interface. "They're not messing around, Captain." Aelrin, his normally stoic features etched with worry, surveyed the chaos unfolding before him. The human pirates, led by the infamous Butcher, had moved with brutal efficiency, their tactics a jarring contrast to the methodical precision he was accustomed to. A chilling sense of vulnerability washed over him, a feeling he had never experienced in his long career as a captain. "We need to secure the bridge," Aelrin barked, his voice echoing in the cramped corridor. "Kiara, take Norak and get to the engineering deck. We need to lock down the ship." Kiara, her initial fear giving way to a surge of adrenaline, nodded. "On it, Captain." Their escape route was a maze of narrow corridors and flickering emergency lights. The rhythmic clang of metal against metal echoed through the ship, a grim reminder of the relentless human assault. As Kiara and Norak raced towards the engineering deck, she could feel the vibration of their ship being shaken by the humans' relentless bombardment. Reaching the engineering deck, they were met by a scene of organized chaos. The air was thick with the acrid smell of ozone and burning wires. Several crew members were frantically attempting to secure the ship's systems, their panicked movements a stark contrast to the methodical efficiency Norak embodied. "We need to cut off power to the cargo bay," Norak said, his voice tight with urgency. "If they get to the main reactor, we are doomed." Kiara, her eyes flicking across the complex array of panels, knew exactly what to do. She had trained for these moments, her quick wit and innate understanding of her ship's intricate workings making her indispensable to the crew. With practiced hands, she manipulated the controls, severing the power to the cargo bay, plunging it into darkness. "It's done," she announced, a flicker of pride in her voice. Her eyes met Norak's, and she saw a glimmer of grudging admiration in his normally stoic gaze. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. They knew the respite was temporary. The Butcher wouldn't be deterred easily. He was a predator who craved the thrill of the hunt, and he wouldn't give up until he had claimed his prize. They waited, listening intently, their senses heightened, every clang and thump echoing in the silence like a death knell. Then it came, a muffled thud, followed by a series of desperate screams. The Butcher had found their hiding place. The adrenaline surged back, flooding her veins. She grabbed Norak's arm, her grip tight. "We need to get to the escape pods. Now." "We're not running, Kiara," Norak said, his voice betraying a tremor. "We fight." "There will be another time to fight, Norak," Kiara argued, her scales flashing green with a fierce determination. "But if we get caught here, there won't be a time for anything." Realization dawned on Norak's wrinkled face. He knew Kiara was right. Their only chance of survival lay in escape. Together, they sprinted towards the escape pods, their hearts pounding in their chests, the echoes of the Butcher's relentless pursuit ringing in their ears. As they reached the escape pod bay, a flicker of fear jolted through Kiara. The Butcher had anticipated their escape. Human pirates were notoriously unpredictable, and their ruthlessness knew no bounds. But Kiara had learned something in their brief encounter with the human pirate. He was as cunning as he was brutal, and she suspected he had a plan. She didn't know what that plan entailed, but she knew it wouldn't be pleasant. And as the metallic clang of their ship being boarded grew closer, she knew they were running out of time. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of fear. We huddled in the shadows, the flickering lights of the control room casting long, distorted figures on the walls. The Butcher, that human brute, had taken the helm, his crew milling about the deck, their eyes like hungry wolves scanning for prey. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm against the oppressive silence of the ship. Kiara, her usually bright eyes filled with a terrifying intensity, whispered, "We need a plan, Captain. We can't stay hidden forever." Aelrin, his face etched with worry, stared at the flickering image of the Butcher on the comm screen. The man's piercing gaze seemed to penetrate the very walls of the ship. "He's playing a game, Kiara. He's waiting for us to make a move." Norak, ever the pragmatist, chimed in, "We're no match for his crew. We need leverage." He gestured towards the control panel, his hands calloused from years of labor. "The cargo hold? He'll want it." A flicker of hope sparked within me. The butcher was a pirate, driven by greed, not just cruelty. Perhaps we could use that to our advantage. Captain, we could offer him a deal. Aelrin hesitated, his jaw clenched. What kind of deal? He wants the cargo. We give him a percentage, enough to entice him, but not enough to destroy our reputation. I explained, my voice trembling slightly. In exchange, he lets us go. We can even arrange for safe passage. Aelrin's eyes narrowed, studying me. He saw the desperation in my proposal, the fear that gripped my heart. A flicker of something else, something akin to admiration, crossed his face. You think he'll agree to that? We have to try, I replied, my voice firming. We have nothing to lose. Narek nodded. It's a gamble, but it might be our only shot. With an unspoken agreement, we moved into action. We devised a plan, carefully crafting a message for the butcher through the ship's comms. We highlighted the value of the cargo, the risk of losing it, and offered him a generous cut of the profits. The silence that followed was deafening. We held our breath, waiting for the butcher's response. Finally, it came, a low chuckle that vibrated through the comms, followed by a voice as cold as space. Interesting offer, little alien. But I need more than just a few credits. I need. His voice trailed off, leaving us hanging. I'm listening, Aelrin replied, his voice calm despite the tremor in his hands. The butcher's voice returned, a hint of amusement in its icy tone. I need you to show me your ship's records, all of them. Show me your secrets, alien. Prove to me you're worth more alive than dead. A chill ran down my spine. It was a dangerous game, but one we had to play. The butcher was testing us, trying to find our limits. Very well, Aelrin said, his voice unwavering. We'll grant you access to the records, but you must promise us safe passage. A moment of silence stretched on, the tension in the room growing thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, the butcher's laughter echoed through the comms, echoing the chilling emptiness of the void. I like your spirit, little alien, your bravery. I'll give you your chance. For now. As the butcher's words faded, a sense of relief washed over us. But it was a fleeting sensation, replaced by a gnawing worry. The butcher had granted us a reprieve, yes, but he had also unveiled a glimpse of the human depths. He was not just a monster, he was a player. He could be cruel, but he could also be cunning, even human. And that was the most terrifying thought of all. The air hung thick with tension, a palpable wave of fear washing over the crew of the Voyager. The butcher, the human pirate who had boarded their ship like a storm, stood in the middle of the bridge, his crew flanking him like a pack of hungry wolves. Aelrin, the stoic captain, his normally rigid composure now frayed, watched the human from behind the safety of a shattered console. You've got a nice ship, Aelrin, the butcher said, his voice a rasping baritone, laced with amusement. Shame about the cargo, though, bit of a disappointment. He gestured at the scattered crates, their contents spilling onto the floor. Kiara, the first mate, her youthful bravado masked by a thin veneer of fear, found her voice. What do you want? You've already taken what you came for. The butcher chuckled, a sound like nails scraping on a chalkboard. Oh, I'm just getting started, Kiara. You see, I'm not like those other pirates. I don't just plunder. I play a game. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over the cowering crew. A game of survival, he continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. But I like to make it interesting. He looked at Aelrin, a smirk playing on his lips. You see, Aelrin, you have a choice. You can either hand over the rest of your cargo, your precious little trinkets, or you can face the consequences. Aelrin's grip tightened on his blaster. He knew the human was playing a dangerous game, but he wasn't about to back down. We have nothing else of value, he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his gut. You've taken everything. The butcher's smile widened. Oh, I think you're mistaken, he said, his eyes glinting with malicious intent. I'm after something far more valuable than mere trinkets. He turned to his crew, giving a sharp nod. They immediately went to work, securing the ship's control systems, isolating the alien crew from their communication network. The butcher watched them, a steely glint in his eye. "I'm after the secrets of your technology," he said, his voice now a chilling whisper. "Secrets that could make me very, very rich." Aelren's heart pounded in his chest. The butcher was right. Their ship, with its advanced tech, was a treasure trove of innovation, something the butcher could exploit for immense profit. But revealing those secrets would mean jeopardizing their entire species, potentially triggering a war. "We won't betray our people," Aelren said, his voice trembling with resolve. "You can take our lives, but you won't get our secrets." The butcher laughed, the sound echoing in the cramped confines of the bridge. "Don't be so dramatic, Aelren," he said, his voice laced with amusement. "I'm not asking you to betray your people. I'm offering you a chance to survive." He paused, his gaze now intense. "Tell me what you know about that technology, and I'll let you and your crew go. No harm done." Aelren stared at the human, his mind racing. The offer seemed ludicrous, a cruel joke. But there was a flicker of something else in the butcher's eyes, a hint of something deeper, a flicker of humanity that refused to be extinguished. He looked at Kiara, her eyes wide with fear, but also with a spark of defiance. She was the most adaptable member of his crew, the one most likely to see a way out of this treacherous situation. "We have no secrets," Aelren said, his voice strained. "If we did, we wouldn't be here now." The butcher's smirk faltered. A moment of unsettling silence stretched between them. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you, Aelren?" the butcher said, his tone a mixture of amusement and annoyance. "Fine, I've got time. We'll play a different game then." He clapped his hands together, a chilling sound that sent shivers down Aelren's spine. His crew immediately began to move, their movements precise and efficient. "I'll give you a chance to escape," the butcher said, his voice laced with a kind of sardonic sympathy. "But you'll have to earn it." Aelren watched as the human pirates began to dismantle the ship's control systems, their actions a chilling reminder of the danger they were in. He knew they had to act quickly, but with the ship's communication network compromised, escape seemed impossible. "What's the game, Butcher?" Kiara asked, her voice low and strained. The butcher paused, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Your escape pods," he said, gesturing towards the emergency bay. "They're your only way out, but you'll have to find a way to get to them. And once you're in, you have 1 hour to launch. After that, you're on your own." He smiled, a cruel, predatory grin. "Good luck, Aelren." Aelren knew the odds were stacked against them. They were trapped on a ship controlled by ruthless pirates, their escape pods their only chance of survival. But he also knew, in his gut, that the butcher was playing a game, and he couldn't quite figure out the rules. "Kiara, get the crew to the escape pods," Aelren said, a steely resolve hardening his voice. "We'll fight our way through." Kiara nodded, a fierce determination replacing her fear. "We'll get out of this, Captain," she said, her voice ringing with confidence. "I promise you." They had a long, perilous road ahead, but Aelren knew, despite the odds, that they would have to fight for their lives. And somewhere, in the shadow of the butcher's ruthlessness, he saw a flicker of hope, a chance that, despite everything, they might just survive this ordeal. The air thrummed with a low, dangerous hum, the pulse of the butcher's ship resonating through the hull of our vessel. It was a sound that sent shivers down my spine, a chilling reminder of the predator that had taken control of our home. Kiara, ever the optimist, tried to mask her fear with a brave smile, but her trembling fingers betrayed her. "They're in the cargo hold," Narak rasped, his voice strained, "and they're not messing around. They're throwing crates, dismantling equipment, like they're trying to cripple the ship." "Maybe they're searching for something," Kiara offered, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe they're just looking for the captain." I shook my head, the reality of the situation settling in. "They're looking for trouble, Kiara. They're looking to tear us apart. The butcher's crew doesn't play by the rules." The words felt heavy in my mouth. I couldn't bring myself to believe Narak's assessment. to accept the possibility that we were facing a force so ruthlessly destructive. My mind clung to the hope that this was just a power play, a demonstration of force meant to intimidate us, a means to grab our cargo and move on. "What's our plan, Captain?" Kiara asked, her usually confident voice filled with a tremor that I could not ignore. "We wait, we observe, we learn. We may have lost control of our ship, but we haven't lost our minds." The ship lurched, a jarring reminder of our precarious position. The butcher's ship, a brutal testament to human ingenuity, was a stark contrast to our sleek, efficient vessel. It was raw, powerful, and dangerous, like a wild beast unleashed. "We can't stay here, Captain," Narek said, his voice gruff. "We need to act." The butcher's crew was ruthless, but they were also methodical. Their actions were calculated, their movements precise, each step carefully orchestrated. They were tearing apart the ship with calculated savagery, but they were also revealing their tactics. They were working their way through the ship, systematically dismantling it, seeking a specific objective. "We need to find out their objective, Narek," I said, my voice firm. "We need to understand their game." Narek, ever the pragmatist, knew I was right. I could see it in his eyes, the flicker of understanding and acceptance, replacing the fear that had momentarily clouded his gaze. "We can't just sit here," Kiara said, her voice urgent. "We need to do something." "We will," I assured her, my voice laced with steel. "But we need to be smart about it. We need to think like the butcher." "And how do we do that?" she asked, her face a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. "We look for the patterns," I said, my gaze sharp. "We watch the way they move. We listen to their communications. We use their chaos to our advantage." The air grew thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the rhythmic thudding of the butcher's ship against our hull. The wait was a game of patience, a test of our resolve. We had to stay calm, stay focused, stay one step ahead. This was our ship, and I would not let it fall without a fight. The butcher might have taken control, but I knew that we could still turn the tide. The game had just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. The air in the control room was thick with a metallic tang of fear and the cloying scent of ozone. The flickering emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows that danced across the consoles, making the already alien environment seem even more sinister. Aelrin, his normally stoic face etched with worry, ran a hand through his short, blue-green hair. He scanned the holographic map, his gaze bouncing between the flashing red dot representing their ship and the ominous green one that marked the butcher's vessel, now hovering menacingly close. "Captain," Kiara said, her voice tight with anxiety. "Their ship is coming closer. We need to make a decision. Should we try to jump to hyperspace?" Aelrin shook his head, his gaze fixed on the map. "The butcher knows we're here, Kiara. He wouldn't let us jump so easily. He wouldn't give us the chance to escape." His words echoed Kiara's own fears. The butcher's ship, a hulking monstrosity of jagged metal and burning thrusters, seemed to devour the space around it with an almost predatory hunger. It was a vessel that screamed of ruthless efficiency and calculated aggression, a stark contrast to the sleek, streamlined lines of the trade ship. "What other options do we have?" Kiara asked, her fingers drumming nervously on the console. "We can't stay here. We're sitting ducks." "We can try to outmaneuver them," Narek offered from his usual spot, his weathered face illuminated by the dim light of his workbench. "He might not expect us to fight back, might think we're just a bunch of scared traitors." Aelrin considered Norak's suggestion, his eyes flickering to the weapon systems. The trade ship was equipped for defense, but its primary purpose was to carry goods, not engage in combat. It was no match for the butcher's vessel. "We're not equipped for a fight, Narek," Aelrin said, but even as he spoke, a flicker of determination sparked in his eyes. "But maybe we can use the element of surprise." He turned to Kiara, his expression grim. "Prepare the escape pods. We'll launch them in a diversionary maneuver. I'll take the ship's auxiliary engines and try to create a distraction. Maybe we can buy ourselves some time." "But Captain," Kiara protested, What about the crew? We can't leave them behind. We have no choice, Kiara, Aelrin said, his voice firm. We'll get them back. I promise you. As Kiara rushed to prepare the escape pods, Aelrin looked around the control room at the faces of his crew. Fear and uncertainty were etched on their faces, but beneath it all, he saw a flicker of resilience. He knew they were scared, but they were also determined to survive. Aelrin adjusted his flight suit, his hands finding the familiar weight of his blaster pistol. He knew this was a gamble, a desperate attempt to gain a tactical advantage. But he was a captain, and he would not abandon his crew. The Butcher might be a ruthless pirate, but he would not be underestimated. He would not be beaten. The Butcher's ship, with its menacing silhouette, engulfed the control room in an eerie red glow as it drew closer. Aelrin took a deep breath, his heart pounding against his ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. We have 2 minutes until launch, Captain, Kiara announced, her voice tense. The escape pods are ready. Aelrin nodded, his eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment. He saw fear in her eyes, but also a glimmer of defiance. Then let's make the Butcher regret crossing our path, Aelrin said, his voice a steady rumble in the control room. And with a final, decisive nod, he initiated the escape pod launch sequence, his mind already racing with the next move, the next gamble, in the deadly game of cat and mouse with the human pirate. The air in the control room hung heavy with a scent of ozone and fear. The once vibrant blue glow of the ship's consoles was now a sickly yellow, flickering with a threat of imminent failure. Kiara's heart pounded against her ribs, each beat echoing the rhythmic thud of the ship's engines straining under the Butcher's relentless assault. We need to shut down the main reactor, Narek rasped, his voice laced with fatigue and desperation. The Butcher's jamming our comms. He wants us to fry our systems, it seems. Aelrin, his normally stoic face, etched with worry, nodded grimly. But without power, we become sitting ducks. He'll just board us again. Kiara's gaze darted towards the flickering consoles. There's a backup power source, but it's only enough to run the life support and essential navigation systems. We can't get very far, but it'll buy us time. Time for what? Norak asked, his voice a low rumble. To surrender to that Butcher, to become another notch on his bloody belt? No, Aelrin said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his gut. Time to figure out how to get off this ship without becoming another trophy for that madman. Kiara, drawing strength from Aelrin's unwavering resolve, stepped towards the panel, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar controls. I'm going to activate the backup system, but we only have a few minutes before the main reactor shuts down. We need to find a way to escape. The faint hum of the backup power source filled the room, a fragile whisper against the roar of the engine. Aelrin, his eyes narrowed in concentration, scanned the tactical display. We need to use the escape pods. There are 3 still operational, enough for most of us. But the Butcher's ships will be waiting for us, Narek pointed out. We're sitting ducks in those flimsy pods. Not necessarily, Aelrin said, his gaze locking onto Kiara's. If we launch the escape pods simultaneously, the Butcher won't have the resources to stop all of them. We'll scatter and make reaching their rendezvous point a nightmare. And what about the other crew members? The ones who stayed behind? What about them? Kiara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Aelrin's face hardened. I'm not leaving anyone behind. We'll coordinate with the Butcher and arrange for a prisoner exchange. A prisoner exchange? Narek scoffed. You think that's going to happen? The Butcher doesn't negotiate. He takes what he wants and leaves death in his wake. We have no choice. We have to try. Aelrin's voice, though resolute, betrayed a hint of desperation. The weight of his crew's lives, their future, their very existence, rested on his shoulders. Kiara, her eyes filled with worry and determination, nodded. We need to act fast. He's going to try and take control of the ship again. I'll initiate the escape pod launch sequence, Narek said, his voice gruff but sure. He moved to the comm panel, his fingers flying across the buttons. Aelrin, taking a deep breath, addressed his crew, his voice echoing with a strange mix of resolve and fear. "We have to trust each other. We have to trust that the butcher will keep his word. We need to get out of here, all of us." The air hung thick with tension as the escape pod launch sequence commenced. The ship shuddered under the stress of the process, the alarms blaring a chaotic symphony of warning. Kiara, her gaze fixed on the console, her heart pounding in her chest, whispered a silent prayer for their survival. They were adrift in a sea of uncertainty, their fate tethered to a single, desperate gamble. In the control room, the butcher's voice, cold and menacing, echoed over the comms. "Well played, Captain Aelrin. You've learned to think like a human, but you haven't seen the true scope of my bargain yet." His words hung in the air, a chilling promise of the darkness yet to come. The escape pods launched with a deafening roar, hurtling into the void. They were leaving behind a storm, but the heart of the tempest, the butcher, remained, and they knew that the true battle was far from over. The whine of the ship's internal cooling system was a mournful symphony, echoing through the narrow corridors of the engine room. Aelrin, his face grimy with engine oil and worry, held a flickering plasma torch in his hand, barely illuminating the cavernous space. Kiara, her eyes wide with both fear and determination, stood beside him, her antennae twitching nervously. "It's a trap, Aelrin," she hissed, her voice barely audible over the din of the overworked machinery. "The butcher isn't just after our cargo. He wants to cripple our ship." "He's already done that," Aelrin muttered, his gaze fixed on the mangled wires and sparking conduits. "Narek managed to patch up the main reactor, but the auxiliary thrusters are gone. We're stuck here, vulnerable." Their initial escape attempt had been a disaster. They had underestimated the butcher's ruthlessness. His men had swarmed the ship like a plague of shadow creatures, leaving a trail of chaos and destruction in their wake. They had been forced to retreat, abandoning their comrades in the fight, their hearts heavy with a guilt they couldn't shake off. "Where's Narek?" Kiara asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "He's checking the comms system," Aelrin said, his voice strained. "We need to get word out to the authorities. Maybe someone can hear us." The faint hum of a comms panel flickered to life, drawing Aelrin and Kiara's attention. Norak, his face etched with worry, emerged from behind the panel, his hands shaking slightly. "I got a faint signal," he said, his voice hoarse. "But it's encrypted. The butcher's jamming everything. It's only a matter of time before they find us." A cold dread settled over Aelrin. Their chances of escape seemed to dwindle with each passing moment. The only hope they had was a slim possibility of someone picking up the faint signal Narek managed to decipher. Suddenly, the air shimmered and a figure materialized before them, bathed in an eerie blue light. Kiara gasped, her claws instinctively unfurling. But Aelrin saw the familiar grimace on the man's face. It was the butcher, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Aelrin's skin crawl. Well, the butcher said, his voice a chillingly calm contrast to the discordant symphony of the failing engines. "Looks like the little bugs have finally crawled out of their hiding place." Aelrin drew himself up, his antennae bristling with defiance. "You think you've won?" he snapped, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "We won't give you the satisfaction of seeing us surrender." The butcher's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You haven't seen anything yet. I'm just getting started." He turned his gaze upon Kiara, his eyes gleaming with a predatory gleam. "And you," he said, his voice a low growl. "You look like you're ripe for a new kind of adventure." Kiara felt a shiver run down her spine, but she stood her ground. She wasn't a helpless victim waiting to be devoured. Her eyes narrowed, her antennae twitching with defiance. "You'll never get what you want," she challenged, her voice unwavering. "We will fight you to the end." The butcher's laughter echoed through the engine room, cold and hollow. "You're braver than I gave you credit for," he said, his eyes never leaving Kiara. "But bravery won't stop me." As he stepped closer, the air grew thick with tension. Aelrin felt a surge of primal fear, but it was quickly overtaken by a steely determination. He would not let this human pirate win. He wouldn't let him break them, not while there was still a flicker of hope within their hearts. The butcher's arrival in the engine room marked a turning point. The shadow of fear had taken a sinister turn, becoming a tangible threat, a tangible enemy. But even facing the chilling depths of their darkest fears, Aelrin and Kiara knew that their fight was far from over. The clock was ticking, but their will to survive burned brighter than ever. The air hung heavy with a metallic tang of fear and the acrid bite of burnt wiring. Aelrin, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, gripped the railing of the bridge, his gaze sweeping across the chaotic scene. The butcher's men, clad in black armor that shimmered with an unsettling sheen, patrolled the corridors, their weapons humming with menace. The once familiar, sleek control panels of his ship were now littered with smashed screens and ripped wires, testament to the human pirate's brutal efficiency. Kiara, her usual spark dimmed by worry, knelt beside a flickering console, her slender fingers tracing the damage. "Captain," she said, her voice tight, "they've severed the communications system. We're completely isolated." Aelrin sucked in a breath, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His initial plan, a desperate attempt to retake the ship by force, had been utterly shattered by the sheer ferocity of the human attack. Their technology, brutal and unforgiving, had ripped through their defenses like a hot knife through butter. He looked at Kiara, her face pale but resolute. Even in this dire situation, she held her own, her quick mind already formulating a new strategy. "We need to get a message out," he said, his voice low and steady. "They might not have taken the escape pods." "There's a chance," Kiara replied, her eyes flickering with a glint of hope. "But the power relays are damaged. We'll need to patch them manually." Aelrin nodded, his gaze falling on Narak, who sat slumped in a corner, his long, spindly arms wrapped around his knees. The old engineer was a formidable mechanic, but his usual cynicism had been replaced with a grim silence. "Narak," Aelrin addressed him, his voice firm, "can you stabilize the power relays?" Narak looked up, his eyes cloudy with fatigue. "It'll be a risky move, Captain. One wrong connection, and we could fry the entire system." "We have no other choice," Aelrin replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Narak sighed, a deep, mournful sound. "I'll do what I can." Kiara, ever the optimist, piped up. "We need to find a way to distract the humans while Narak works his magic. Maybe a diversion? Something to draw them away from the bridge." Aelrin frowned. "What kind of diversion?" "Remember the cargo hold?" Kiara said, a sly smile playing on her lips. "The one with those exotic, bioluminescent plants we picked up on Alara Prime? They're supposed to be incredibly loud, and the humans have no idea what they are." Aelrin stared at her, the absurdity of the plan slowly dawning on him. But there was a certain brilliance to it. The human, so focused on conquering with their superior firepower, were likely oblivious to the potential chaos of alien flora. "It's a long shot," he admitted, "but it might just buy us some time." He clapped Kiara on the shoulder, a gesture he didn't usually indulge in. "Go for it, first mate, and for the love of the cosmos, be careful." As Kiara rushed out of the bridge, Narak turned to Aelrin, his eyes narrowed. "You're putting a lot of faith in that young one, Captain." Aelrin nodded, his gaze lingering on the flickering console. "Kiara's got grit, Narak. More than most realize. It's time we saw that." He paused, then added, "And besides, we have no other choice." The butcher's ship was a predator, efficient and relentless, but Aelrin knew that even the most powerful beast had its vulnerabilities. This was their chance, their gamble. Whether it would be their salvation or their undoing, only the stars knew. But for the moment, he chose to believe in his crew, in Kiara, and in the long, improbable shot that was their only hope. The stench of burnt circuits and ozone hung heavy in the air, a bitter reminder of the chaotic battle that had just unfolded. The butcher's crew, clad in their sleek black armor, stood triumphant amidst the wreckage of the trade ship's control room. Their red eyes, glowing with a cold intensity, scanned the room, searching for any sign of resistance. Captain Aelrin, his weathered face etched with worry, watched from the shadows. The Butcher's crew had been relentless, their weapons precise and deadly. The trade ship, once a haven of order and efficiency, now resembled a battleground, its once pristine corridors stained with the blood of his crewmates. Kiara, her young face pale with fear, crouched beside him. "What do we do, Captain?" her voice barely a whisper. Aelren's hand tightened around the hilt of his energy blade. "We fight," he said, his voice steely. "We fight for our lives, and we fight for our ship." His words, though resolute, carried a tremor of uncertainty. He had expected humans to be savage, but the Butcher's tactics and the ruthless efficiency of his crew had surpassed any tales he'd heard. The humans seemed to delight in the chaos, orchestrating every move with a chilling precision. The ship, once a testament to their advanced technology, was now a trap, its very systems turned against them. Narak, with his usual stoic demeanor, stepped into the light. "Captain, we need to get to the escape pods." His voice held a hint of urgency. "The Butcher's going to strip the ship bare. We need to get out before he reaches the cargo hold." The words struck Aelren like a blow. Their cargo, a shipment of rare minerals, was their livelihood, their very future. Losing it would mean financial ruin, a stain on their reputation that would take years to erase. But more importantly, it meant failing his crew, the men and women who had put their lives in his hands. He glanced at Kiara, her eyes filled with a flicker of defiance. "We won't let him take it," she said, her voice rising with newfound resolve. Aelren nodded, a spark of hope rekindling within him. "Narak," he said, "take Kiara and a small team. Get to the escape pods. I'll hold off the Butcher." Narak looked at him, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Captain, this isn't a good idea. The Butcher is too strong." "I have to try," Aelren said, his voice firm. "And besides, you've got something that I haven't." He gestured toward Kiara, who stared back at him with a mixture of apprehension and determination. Narak nodded, understanding dawning on his face. Kiara's quick wit and adaptability had surprised him. Perhaps she was the key to their escape. He gathered a small team and led Kiara to the escape pods, their movements swift and silent. Aelren, left alone, stood in the dimly lit control room, facing the open doorway. The Butcher, silhouetted against the flickering emergency lights, leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. "Well, Captain," the human said, his voice a low rumble, "you put up a good fight." Aelren met his gaze, his eyes hardening. "You haven't won yet, Butcher." The human chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down Aelren's spine. "Oh, I've won, Captain. I've won everything I wanted." He stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "And now, it's time for you to lose everything." Aelren gripped his energy blade, his muscles taut with anticipation. The human was a formidable opponent, but he wouldn't go down without a fight. The fate of his crew, his ship, and his future rested on his next move. He had to buy time for Kiara and Narak, to give them a chance to escape. As the Butcher closed in, Aelren knew he was playing a dangerous game, but in the face of overwhelming odds, there was only one choice: to fight. The air in the cargo hold felt thick, heavy with a scent of stale sweat and the metallic tang of fear. Kiara, crouched behind a stack of crates, felt her heart pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. The Butcher, with his inhumanly calm demeanor, was moving through the ship, his crew a pack of rabid hounds at his heels. He wasn't just searching for survivors, he was hunting them. Aelren, his face grim, stood beside her. "They'll find us. We need to get out of here." "And go where?" "We don't know this ship," Kiara hissed, her voice tight with worry. "There's a ventilation shaft," Narak said, his voice raspy. "I saw it when we first boarded. It's small, but it might lead to the crew quarters." "Crew quarters?" Kiara scoffed. "The Butcher's crew probably already has it locked down." "He wouldn't have left it completely unguarded," Aelren agreed. "But it's our only chance." They moved through the maze of cargo containers, their movements hushed, their every sense alert. The Butcher was a predator, and they were prey. They finally found the ventilation shaft, a narrow, rusty pipe that reeked of oil and decay. Norak, his wiry frame seemingly built for such confined spaces, crawled in first. "It's tight, but it's passable," he called back, his voice muffled. Aelren, despite his size, managed to squeeze through the shaft, followed closely by Kiara. The air was stale and suffocating, the metal walls cold against their skin. They crawled through the dark, narrow tunnel, their hearts pounding with every creak and groan of the ship. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a dimly lit corridor. They were in the crew quarters, a cramped space with bunk beds lining the walls. The room was empty, but the air was thick with the lingering scent of human sweat and stale beer. "Where do we go from here?" Kiara whispered, her voice strained. "This ship is a labyrinth." "We need to find the bridge," Aelren said, his gaze hardening. "We need to talk to the butcher." Kiara felt a tremor of fear run down her spine. The butcher. The name itself sent shivers down her spine. This wasn't a normal pirate. He was a nightmare in human form. "That's insane," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He'll kill us." "We have no choice," Aelren said, his voice firm. "He holds all the cards. We need to negotiate." They crept down the corridor, their shadows dancing along the walls, following a faint hum that emanated from the ship's heart. The closer they got, the more the smell of burnt metal and ozone filled their nostrils, a grim reminder of the chaos that had ravaged their ship. Finally, they reached the bridge. The door was open, revealing a scene of carnage. The butcher stood at the helm, his back to them, his form silhouetted against the backdrop of the vast, star-dusted expanse of space. He was a hulking figure, his broad shoulders and thick arms radiating power. He looked like a creature of darkness, born from the shadows of the galaxy itself. "Welcome back," the butcher said, his voice a low baritone that reverberated in the confined space. He didn't turn around, but his gaze seemed to pierce through them, seeing beyond their fear and into their very souls. Kiara felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a pirate. He was something more, something ancient and primal. Aelren stepped forward, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. "We need to talk." The butcher's head turned slowly, his eyes meeting Aelren's. He gave a slow, predatory smile, revealing rows of sharp, white teeth. "I'm listening." The game was on, and the stakes were higher than ever. The fate of the crew, the future of their trade ship, and their very existence hung in the balance. This was the butcher's bargain, and they had no choice but to play. The air in the control room was thick with tension. The remnants of the butcher's crew, still reeling from our desperate defense, sat huddled in the corners, their sullen silence a stark contrast to the usual cacophony of a busy trade ship. Norak, our grizzled engineer, expertly patched the holes in our ship's hull, muttering under his breath about the sheer incompetence of the humans. I, Captain Aelren, stood before them, a knot of worry tightening in my stomach. My mind raced, trying to decipher the butcher's motivations. He had taken our cargo, yes, but why? Why the brutal raid, the unnecessary destruction, the deliberate taunting? The butcher wasn't just a thief, he was a force of nature, a storm tearing through our carefully planned voyage. I had always believed humans were nothing but destructive creatures, driven by greed and a lust for power. But the butcher was different. There was something in his cold, calculating gaze that hinted at a different story, a deeper purpose hidden beneath the mask of barbarity. Kiara, my first mate, with her usual quick wit and unyielding optimism, broke the silence. "They're just pirates, Captain," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They want to steal our ship, our cargo, and leave us to rot in the void. There's no need to overthink it." But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. The butcher's presence, his chillingly focused gaze, the way he moved with a silent, predatory grace, it was all too deliberate. There was a calculated ruthlessness in his actions, a purpose that went beyond mere plunder. I needed to understand him, to see the strings he was pulling, even if it meant facing the unsettling truth. The entrance hissed open, and the butcher strode in, his boots crunching on the metal floor. He was flanked by two hulking figures, their faces hidden behind grotesque masks that resembled the snarling heads of reptilian beasts. They stood like silent sentinels, their presence a constant reminder of the danger lurking in the shadows. "Captain Aelren," the butcher said, his voice a low growl that seemed to rumble from deep within the ship's hull. He leaned against the control panel, his eyes, like chips of obsidian, fixed on me. "I believe we have a little business to discuss." My instincts screamed at me to flee, to hide, to engage in a desperate scramble for survival. But my mind, fueled by a desperate need to understand, held me rooted in place. "What do you want, Butcher?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my core. The butcher's lips curled into a mocking smile, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "I am offering you a deal, Captain Aelren. A chance to save your ship, your cargo, and your lives." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "In exchange," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I want something from you. Something you possess, something that can be of great value to me." His words sent a chill down my spine. He was playing a game, a dangerous one that threatened to swallow us whole. But what was it he wanted? What could be worth the lives of my crew, the fate of our ship? The butcher stepped closer, his eyes, like predatory birds, examining me, gauging my reaction. "Your knowledge, Captain Aelren," he said, his voice a whisper that seemed to slither through the control room. "Your knowledge of the galactic trade routes, of the hidden sectors, of the secrets the galaxy holds. That is what I want." This was no ordinary pirate. This was something else entirely. He wasn't just after our cargo. He wanted something deeper, something that could change the galaxy's balance of power, and he was willing to risk everything to get it. This wasn't just another trade run gone wrong. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would test our resilience to the core, something that would forever change the course of our lives. The air inside the escape pod was thick with the tang of recycled air and the stench of fear. Norak, hunched over the control panel, his knobby fingers flying across the intricate array of buttons and switches, muttered a string of curses in his native tongue. "We're almost out of fuel," he announced, his voice strained. "We need to make a decision. Jump into the unknown now, or risk being caught by the butcher." Aelren, his face etched with lines of worry, stared out the viewport. The vastness of space stretched before them, a cold, indifferent void that held both promise and peril. The butcher's ship, a menacing silhouette against the backdrop of swirling nebulae, was closing in. "We can't stay here," Kiara said, her voice tight. "He'll find us. We need to take our chances." Aelren nodded, his gaze fixed on the approaching ship. He saw the glint of the butcher's ship's weapons, the cold steel of its hull, a chilling reminder of the havoc it had wreaked upon his crew. The thought of the crew he'd lost, the faces that were forever etched in his mind, was a heavy weight on his heart. He had failed them, and now he had to find a way to redeem himself. "Narak," Aelren said, his voice filled with steely resolve, "prepare for jump." Narak nodded, his eyes glued to the control panel. "Destination?" he asked, his voice laced with the same desperation that gnawed at Aelren's core. "Anywhere," Aelren said, the words heavy with the weight of their situation. "Just away from him." The escape pod vibrated with the surge of energy as Narak initiated the jump sequence. They were hurtling through a swirling vortex of colors, the universe a kaleidoscope of light and sound. The pod shuddered violently, a symphony of alarms echoing through the cramped space. When the disorientation subsided, they found themselves in a new sector, the familiar stars replaced by a strange and unsettling constellation. The butcher's ship was nowhere in sight. They had escaped, but they were adrift in a vast ocean of emptiness, their fate uncertain. Aelren slumped back in his seat, exhaustion tugging at his weary limbs. "We're alive," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "For now." Kiara, her eyes brimming with a mix of fear and relief, approached Aelren. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "what now? Where do we go?" Aelren looked at her, his gaze filled with a mixture of weariness and steely resolve. "We find a way to get home," he said, his voice regaining its authority. "We find a way to rebuild. We won't let this break us." Narak, his face pale, stood by the control panel, his fingers tracing the complex lines of the navigation system. "We're still too far out," he said, his voice a rasp. "It'll take days to reach the nearest space lane." "Days?" Kiara gasped. "Days. What if the butcher finds us?" Aelrin placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He won't," he said, his voice firm. "We're too far out for him to track us. We'll be safe." Kiara looked at him, her face filled with doubt. She knew the butcher was relentless, a force of nature that knew no boundaries. But she also saw the steely resolve in Aelrin's eyes, the fire that had not been extinguished by the ordeal they had endured. The escape pod hummed softly, a testament to the miracle of their survival. As they hurtled through the vastness of space, Aelrin knew that their journey was far from over. The human they had encountered, the butcher, had left an indelible mark upon their souls. They had faced their fears, they had tested their limits, they had discovered a strength within themselves that they never knew existed. But the true test, the one that would define their future, was yet to come. And Aelrin, the stoic captain who once believed humans were nothing but monsters, was now ready to face it, knowing that the universe held both peril and possibility. The stench of burnt wires and ozone clung to the air, a noxious perfume that mingled with the metallic tang of blood. The butcher's ship, a scarred behemoth of gleaming chrome and pulsating red lights, was adrift, a testament to the chaos of their desperate escape. Aelrin, his face etched with fatigue and grime, leaned against the cold metal railing of the bridge. The viewport revealed a swirling nebula, a canvas of chaotic color that mirrored the fury that still simmered within him. Kiara, her eyes bright with adrenaline, paced restlessly. "We have to get out of here," she said, her voice tight with anxiety. "The butcher will be back with reinforcements." "Not while he's fixing his own ship," Narak grunted from his station, his hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the battle. "And he'll be in no rush to chase a runaway ship filled with nothing but a bunch of scared aliens and a handful of stolen credits." Aelrin's gaze drifted back to the nebula, the shifting hues a hypnotic dance of cosmic chaos. He couldn't help but think of the butcher, the unyielding fury in his eyes, the chilling vulnerability in his voice. The human pirate, the embodiment of their worst fears, had left a strange and unexpected echo in his mind. "He's not like the others," Aelrin murmured, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "He's not just a crazed, bloodthirsty beast. He's a pirate." "Captain," Kiara countered, her voice laced with steel. "There's no room for sentiment when dealing with those who prey on the innocent." "But he was different," Aelrin said, the words still foreign to his tongue. "He had a reason, a purpose. I saw it in his eyes." Narek snorted. "You're romanticizing him, Captain. He wanted your cargo and your ship. He would have left you all for dead if he had the chance." "He did try to kill us," Kiara admitted, but her tone was less certain than before. "But the way he did it, it wasn't mindless." Aelrin knew she was right. There was a disturbing, calculated brutality to the butcher's attacks, a cold precision that seemed almost personal. It wasn't the mindless savagery they'd expected from a human pirate. It was something more, something darker, something that resonated with the chaos within the nebula. "He told us a story," Aelrin said, his voice low. "A story about a betrayal, a loss, a shattered heart. He was broken, Kiara, and he used that brokenness as a weapon." "A weapon to plunder and destroy?" Kiara frowned, her eyes filled with a flicker of doubt. "Perhaps," Aelrin admitted, "but perhaps also a weapon to lash out against a universe that had wronged him. He sought revenge, but he also sought something, to understand the pain he carried." A wave of silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the distant crackle of the nebula. Aelrin stared at the swirling colors, the chaos a reflection of the war raging within him. He knew he shouldn't have shown the butcher pity, shouldn't have seen a flicker of humanity in the man's cold eyes. Yet, the encounter had changed something within him, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile soil of his long-held prejudices. "We're lucky he let us go," Narek said, breaking the silence. He could have easily finished us off back there. A shame, though. I was hoping to dismantle his ship myself." Aelrin chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He felt the weight of the responsibility, the fear for his crew, the uncertainty of their future. The butcher's threat had faded, but the echo of his brokenness lingered, a reminder of the complex and often painful nature of humanity. And as he navigated their damaged ship through the swirling nebula, Aelrin knew that their encounter with the butcher would forever change the way he viewed the universe and the creatures that inhabited its vastness. The stench of burnt metal and ozone hung heavy in the air, a pungent reminder of the chaos that had engulfed their ship. Aelrin, his face streaked with grime and worry, stood in the command center, surveying the wreckage. He should have known better than to underestimate a human pirate. The butcher, their tormentor, had vanished after the initial attack, leaving his crew to wreak havoc. Aelrin had been forced to rely on Kiara's ingenuity, her quick thinking, and a few desperate improvisations to regain some semblance of control. That was how they managed to escape the butcher's ship, a battered escape pod hurtling through the void, their only hope a distress beacon that might just reach the nearest trade station. "Captain," Kiara's voice, laced with concern, broke through his grim thoughts. "The pod's power reserves are dwindling. We'll be adrift soon." Aelrin tightened his grip on the control panel. "We can't afford to wait. The butcher will be on our trail. We need to find a way to send out a stronger signal." Norak, their chief engineer, emerged from the engine room, his face grimy and his eyes bloodshot. "Captain, I've got news. The main comm system is fried, but I managed to patch together a makeshift transmitter using salvaged parts. It's not powerful, but it might just get us a response." A glimmer of hope flickered in Aelrin's eyes. "That's our best chance. Get to work, Norak. We need to reach someone before the butcher catches up." Kiara, her face etched with worry, approached Aelrin. "Captain, what if we don't make it? What if the butcher catches us?" "Then we'll fight," Aelrin said, his voice resolute. "But I won't let him intimidate us. I won't let him turn us into cowards." As Narak tinkered with the makeshift transmitter, Kiara joined Aelrin in the command center. She watched the endless expanse of darkness outside the pod's viewport, her mind wrestling with a question that had been gnawing at her ever since they'd escaped the butcher's clutches. "Captain," she began, her voice hesitant. "The butcher, he seemed different." "Different?" Aelrin scoffed. "Different how?" "I don't know," Kiara admitted. "But he didn't seem like the cold-blooded monster we thought he was. He seemed sad." Aelrin, consumed by his own anxieties, waved her concerns away. "You're letting your imagination run wild, Kiara. Don't forget what that human did to us. He's a pirate, a predator. There's no sadness in him, only cold ambition." Kiara didn't respond. She couldn't shake the lingering feeling that there was more to the butcher than they'd witnessed. He'd seemed less interested in taking their lives and more focused on achieving a specific goal, a goal that remained shrouded in mystery. Meanwhile, Narak, his brow furrowed in concentration, finally managed to activate the makeshift transmitter. A faint hum echoed through the pod as the signal crackled into the void. Aelrin held his breath, clinging to a sliver of hope. Suddenly, the pod's alarm blared, a shrill sound that sent chills down their spines. "What is it?" Aelrin demanded, his heart thumping in his chest. "It's a comm signal," Narak said, his voice strained. "It's from the butcher." Aelrin felt a wave of nausea sweep over him. "What's he want?" Kiara asked, her voice trembling. Narak's face blanched. He wants us to meet him, at the abandoned space station." Aelrin hesitated. He knew they were in a dire situation, but the thought of facing the butcher again sent a shiver of fear down his spine. "We can't risk it," Aelrin said, his voice shaking. "He's a ruthless pirate. He'll only double-cross us." Kiara, ever the pragmatist, interjected. "But, Captain, maybe this is our only chance. If we can negotiate with him, maybe we can find a way to get our ship back." Aelrin stared at the screen, his gaze fixed on the image of the butcher's ship, a dark silhouette against the star-strewn canvas of space. He had been taught to fear humans, to view them as savage and unpredictable. But something about their predicament, the desperate situation they found themselves in, made him question everything he had ever believed. He looked at Kiara's hopeful face, her eyes reflecting a desperate plea. "We have no choice," Aelrin said, his voice heavy with resignation. "We'll meet him, but we'll go prepared." As the pod began to steer toward the abandoned space station, Aelrin knew that this encounter could change everything. It could be the end for them, or it could be the beginning of something completely unexpected. He had no idea what awaited him, but he was determined to find out. The air hung thick with the stench of burnt circuitry and fear. Norak, his hands slick with sweat and grease, struggled to rewire the damaged control panel. The Butcher's crew had wreaked havoc, leaving the ship a chaotic mess of ripped wires, shattered screens, and the lingering threat of a system overload. "Get it done, Narak," Aelrin barked, his voice tight with worry. "We need to regain control of the ship if we want to escape this mess." Narak glanced at the captain, his usually stoic face contorted with a grim expression. Aelrin's normally calm demeanor was replaced with a tense urgency, a stark reminder of the precarious situation they were in. Kiara, ever the optimist, tried to lighten the mood. "Don't worry, Captain. Narak's a whiz with this stuff. He'll have us back in control in no time." She forced a smile, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. "Yeah, if we can get past this blasted security lock," Narak grumbled. He tapped furiously at the panel, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Butcher had implanted a fail-safe, a digital lock that prevented any unauthorized access. Aelrin had been right to distrust humans. They were a species of cunning and relentless efficiency, a fact that Narak was finding painfully evident. Aelrin, however, was surprisingly calm. He had faced his fair share of challenges in his long career as a captain, but he'd never been in a situation quite like this. The Butcher's invasion had not only shaken their sense of security, but had forced him to confront the uncomfortable truth about his own prejudices. His ingrained distrust of humans, a prejudice nurtured by generations of stories about their cruelty and greed, had been shattered by the events of the past few days. The Butcher, for all his ruthlessness, seemed to possess a strange sense of honor, a respect for their skills, and even a hint of begrudging camaraderie. "How's it coming, Narak?" Aelrin asked, his voice laced with a hint of hope. "Almost there, Captain," Narak replied, a sliver of determination in his voice. He was putting all his engineering skills to the test, pushing the battered console to its limits. Suddenly, a low hum resonated through the ship. The lights flickered, then stabilized. Narak, sweat glistening on his brow, let out a sigh of relief. "Done. The locks bypassed. The ship's back under our control." Aelrin let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A wave of relief washed over him. They had a chance, albeit a slim one, to escape. As the ship's systems came back online, Aelrin turned to Kiara, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You were right, Kiara. Narak is a whiz." Kiara smiled, a flash of pride in her eyes. "We're a team, Captain. We'll get through this." But the relief was short-lived. A chilling announcement crackled through the intercom, the Butcher's deep voice cutting through the uneasy calm. "Aelrin, we've got a deal to discuss. Meet me in the cargo hold. Bring your first mate." Aelrin exchanged a worried glance with Kiara. The weight of their encounter with the Butcher, the terrifying yet strangely intriguing human, weighed heavily on them. He understood the human's ruthless tactics, his drive for survival, but something else, something he couldn't quite grasp, lingered in the air. It was a vulnerability, a sliver of humanity peeking out from behind the ruthless exterior. What the Butcher wanted, they didn't know. But one thing was certain: the fate of their ship, their lives, and maybe even the future of their species, would be determined in the shadowy depths of the cargo hold. The air in the cramped escape pod hummed with a nervous energy that was almost tangible. Aelrin, his face etched with lines of worry, gripped the control panel, his knuckles white. The Butcher, seemingly oblivious to the tension, sat opposite him, his gaze fixed on the starfield outside the viewport. "So, you think you're clever, do you?" The butcher's voice, deep and gruff, cut through the silence. "Escape pod, like a little bird fleeing its cage. But you forget, little bird, there are cages you cannot escape." Aelrin, maintaining a facade of calm, remained silent. Kiara, seated beside him, subtly shifted her weight, a flicker of fear passing over her features. They had been forced into the escape pod, a desperate gambit to escape the butcher's grasp. The human pirate ship had boarded theirs with unnerving efficiency, and the fight for control had been short, brutal, and ultimately lost. Aelrin was the only one who had managed to get a message out. A plea for aid, a beacon of desperation sent across the galactic trade lanes, a plea that likely wouldn't be noticed in the vast expanse of the galaxy. "You're a traitor, Aelrin," the butcher continued, his gaze unwavering. "A peddler of trinkets and baubles. You think you're above me, above this? But I bet you never think about the cost of your precious cargo, the lives it steals, the wars it fuels." Aelrin knew the accusations were unfounded. Their cargo was no different than any other trade route, but the human pirate's words struck a chord. An echo of the stories he'd heard, whispered in hushed tones about the cruelty of humans, their insatiable greed, and their capacity for destruction. "I've seen your kind," the butcher continued, his voice softening, becoming a rasp. "Your fear, your judgment. But you don't understand. Not truly. You see me, you see what I've done, but you don't see the storm that made me, the pain that drives me." He leaned forward, his shadowed face illuminated by the faint glow of the control panel. "I wasn't always this way, Aelrin. I was the butcher, yes, but I was also a soldier, a protector, and then everything changed. Everything was lost." Aelrin felt a prickle of empathy, a strange, unexpected feeling. The story of a broken man, a man consumed by pain and driven by a need for revenge. Was this the human he had been taught to fear? The butcher looked at Aelrin, a flicker of something akin to regret in his eyes. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Aelrin. Just understanding. We're both caught in a game we didn't choose to play. And sometimes the only way to survive is to fight fire with fire." The escape pod trembled, a jarring jolt that brought them both back to the reality of their situation. Kiara spoke, her voice a whisper, "They're chasing us." The butcher chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. "They're not chasing us," he said, his eyes glinting with amusement. "They're just making sure we don't get away." Aelrin's gaze locked with the butcher's, a strange mix of fear and grudging respect simmering within him. This was not a monster, not entirely. This was a man, broken, scarred, but still holding on to a flicker of humanity, and that, Aelrin realized, was the most frightening thing of all. The air hung thick with a scent of scorched metal and ozone, a nauseating reminder of the chaos that had engulfed their ship. Kiara, her hands slick with sweat, clung to the edge of the ventilation shaft, her heart pounding like a trapped bird against her ribs. The butcher's men, clad in black armor that shimmered with an eerie purple sheen, patrolled the corridors, their heavy boots echoing ominously in the silence. "They're still searching," Narek whispered from behind her, his voice hoarse. "We need to find a way to contact Aelrin." Kiara knew he was right. Their plan to regain control of the ship rested on Aelrin's ability to exploit the butcher's vulnerabilities. They were running out of time. The butcher's ship, a sleek black monstrosity, was still docked with theirs, a constant reminder of their precarious situation. Suddenly, a muffled sound pierced the silence. A rhythmic tapping, coming from the next level. Kiara's pulse quickened. The butcher's crew was notorious for their use of elaborate traps. "What is it?" Narek hissed, his eyes wide with anticipation. Kiara cautiously approached the grating, peering into the dimly lit corridor. A single, glowing red light flickered from the wall, its rhythmic pulse mirroring the tapping sound. A message. "It's a message," Kiara breathed. Aelrin must have left it. Narak's weathered face lit up with a flicker of hope. "Let's see what he has to say." Kiara activated a small device she had salvaged from the wreckage. a universal translator that enabled her to understand any language. As the message cycled through the translator, images flashed before her eyes, a flickering hologram of Aelrin, his face drawn and grim. Kiara, Narak, Aelrin's voice crackled through the translator. I've managed to make contact with the butcher. He's surprisingly vulnerable. We need to exploit that. Kiara felt a wave of relief wash over her. Aelrin was alive, and he had a plan. But the message continued, and a chill crept down her spine. He's been trying to contact his old crew, the ones who betrayed him. The butcher's been haunted by what happened to them ever since. He wants to find them, to understand their betrayal. It's his weakness. The image flickered again, this time revealing a blurry image of a desolate, rocky planet. A single, derelict spacecraft sat on the surface, its hull pockmarked with craters. He believes they're on that planet. It's a long shot, but we need to use it to our advantage. I've gotten him to agree to a trade. I'll give him access to a section of our cargo hold, a section he believes contains valuable artifacts. In exchange, he will release you and our crew and allow us to leave. You need to get to the coordinates he provided. We'll meet you there. The image faded, leaving only the pulsating red light. Kiara's mind raced, trying to grasp the implications of Aelrin's plan. They would be traveling to a desolate, unknown planet, with the butcher's entire crew trailing them. But it was their only chance. We need to get to that planet, Narak, Kiara said, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her insides. We need to get out of here. I'm on it, Narak said, his eyes already scanning the ventilation shaft. I'll get us to the escape pods. We have a chance here, Kiara, but we need to move fast. Kiara nodded, a new resolve hardening her features. Their encounter with the butcher had shown them that even the most fearsome beings could be driven by emotions, by regrets, by a yearning for redemption. They couldn't afford to underestimate the human pirate, but they also couldn't let fear cripple their initiative. Their escape, their survival, rested on their ability to exploit the butcher's vulnerability, to seize the moment and trust in the unknown. Kiara and Narak moved swiftly, a sense of urgency propelling them through the labyrinthine corridors of the ship. As they made their way toward the escape pods, the metallic echoes of the butcher's crew echoed in their wake, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked around every corner. But somewhere in the midst of the fear, a spark of hope flickered, fueled by the audacity of Aelrin's plan, by the fragile alliance they had forged, and by the knowledge that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, there was always a chance for redemption. The air crackled with tension in the makeshift command center. Aelrin, perched on a makeshift throne of salvaged crates, stared out into the darkness beyond the port window. The butcher's ship, the hulking monstrosity of metal and spikes, sat like a hungry predator, its guns trained on the trade ship's hull. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic hum of the ship's life support and the occasional crackle of the comms. "What does he want?" Kiara asked, her voice tight with worry. She had spent the past few days in a blur of activity, helping Narak patch up the damage and scavenge for resources. Now they waited. "He wants something," Narak replied, his voice gruff. "He wants something important enough to risk a full-scale war with the Galactic Trade Commission." Aelrin nodded. He had seen enough of human violence to know that the butcher wouldn't risk this much for a simple plunder. The humans' demands had been cryptic, a series of riddles and veiled threats hinting at a deeper purpose. The comms crackled to life. The butcher's voice, raspy and chillingly calm, filled the room. "Captain Aelrin," he said, "I believe it's time we discussed your terms of surrender." Aelrin stood, his own voice steady. "You haven't earned surrender, Butcher. You've earned a fight." "Ah, but you misunderstand," the butcher chuckled, the sound sending shivers down Kiara's spine. "I'm not here to take everything. I'm here to make a bargain." He proposed an exchange, a trade of information for safe passage. The information was crucial, a map to a hidden anomaly in the Outer Rim, a place untouched by civilization, a place with the potential to shift the power balance of the galaxy. Aelrin knew the risks. To reveal such knowledge would make them the target of empires and pirates alike. Yet, to refuse would be to invite the butcher's wrath upon their crew. As he considered his options, he looked at Kiara, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "We can't let him walk away with this information," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But what other choice do we have?" Aelrin knew she was right. He had seen the butcher's methods. He had experienced the raw, unyielding power of human desperation. Aelrin had come to understand that the human pirate was not just a monster, but a man driven by a past he couldn't escape. This wasn't just a battle for their lives, it was a battle for their souls. "We'll trade him what he wants," Aelrin said, his voice betraying a flicker of doubt. "But then, we make our escape." Kiara's face lit up with hope. "Aelrin, you want to?" He met her gaze, a steely glint in his eyes. "We cannot trust him, but we can outsmart him." They would play the butcher's game, using his own cunning against him. The butcher's voice boomed through the comms. "I appreciate your consideration, Captain. I'll await your answer. However, time is of the essence. The anomaly is unstable, and I've a feeling we both know what happens when humans run out of time." The fear in his voice was masked by a chilling calmness, but Aelrin felt a subtle shift, a hint of something fragile beneath the hard exterior. Aelrin looked at Kiara, his expression unreadable. It's time to show the butcher what it means to be truly resourceful. He knew the risks. He knew the dangers. But for the first time since the butcher had boarded their ship, Aelrin felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't sure if he could trust the butcher, or if he could trust himself to escape this mess. But for now, he had a plan. And for now, that was all that mattered. The tension in the room was palpable as Aelrin began to outline their escape plan. The butcher was a predator, yes, but he was also a creature of habit. Aelrin hoped to exploit that, to use the butcher's own obsession to their advantage. This was not the end. It was merely the beginning of their desperate gamble. Aelrin stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the vast, star-strewn expanse of the galactic trade lanes. The ship hummed with a subdued energy, the silence broken only by the gentle hum of the engines and the rhythmic click of the navigation console. It had been a week since the butcher boarded their vessel, a week of navigating the tightrope walk between fear and defiance. The human pirate had proven to be a master of manipulation, his grip on the ship tightening with each passing day. "Captain," Kiara's voice, laced with a hint of anxiety, cut through the silence. "The butcher wants to see you in the mess hall. He says he has something important to share." Aelrin's gut twisted. He had grown accustomed to the butcher's unpredictable nature, each interaction a test of his will. Yet, this sudden invitation, delivered with a chillingly calm tone by the human's lieutenant, felt different. It held a weight that he couldn't ignore. "He wants to share something important." He repeated the words aloud, testing them on his tongue, as he slowly turned toward Kiara, studying her face. "What do you think, first mate?" Kiara's brow furrowed. "I don't know, Captain. It could be a trap. He might be trying to weaken us before making his final move." Aelrin nodded. His instincts screamed at him to refuse. He knew the dangers of trusting a human pirate, especially one as ruthless as the butcher. But a flicker of curiosity, a sliver of hope, tugged at his resolve. Maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to gain an edge, to learn something about the human's motives. "Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes, he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his chest. "But let Norak accompany me." Kiara gave him a concerned look, but nodded. "Aye, Captain." He watched as she left, his mind racing. Norak, the grizzled engineer, was the only one he truly trusted in this unfolding nightmare. His practical wisdom and cynical humor were a lifeline amidst the chaos. As Aelrin walked towards the mess hall, his hand instinctively reached for the energy blade at his belt. He had learned a hard lesson in the past week. Even in the face of seemingly peaceful negotiations, it was foolish to underestimate the butcher. He entered the mess hall to find the butcher seated at a table, his back to the wall, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. He had a glass of what appeared to be a dark, viscous liquid in his hand, and a small, ornate box lay beside him. The butcher didn't look up as Aelrin and Narak entered. He simply raised his glass, as if in a toast, his lips curling into a chilling smile. "Captain Aelrin, First Engineer Narak, welcome. Have a seat. We have much to discuss." Aelrin and Narak exchanged hesitant glances. The silence in the room, thick with unspoken tension, hung heavy in the air. "To a future we can make together," the butcher continued, his voice low and gravelly. He took a long sip of his drink, his eyes fixed on Aelrin. "Let me tell you a story, Captain. A story of a boy, no, a man, who thought he had seen the worst of humanity." Aelrin's gut clenched. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to run, but he found himself frozen in place. This was a chance to understand the human, to learn about the darkness that had driven him to a life of piracy. The butcher's voice seemed to grow softer, a hint of vulnerability creeping into his tone. "I was a boy when the war came. It ripped my home, my family, my life apart. I lost everything, except for the anger, the hatred." He took another drink, his eyes now reflecting a strange flicker of pain in the dim light of the mess hall. "I swore vengeance, a twisted, bitter vengeance. I became what I had vowed to fight against. A butcher. But even the most hardened hearts can crack, Captain, can change." He pushed the box towards Aelrin. "Inside, you will find what I have left. Everything I have managed to gather of my life before it was stolen." Aelrin reached for the box, his fingers trembling, his heart pounding against his ribs. He knew the risk, the potential betrayal lurking within the human's words. Yet he felt drawn to the story, the raw honesty that pulsed beneath the surface of the butcher's words. The air hung heavy with unspoken understanding, a bridge of shared pain and loss spanning the gap between them. Aelrin opened the box, his eyes falling upon a collection of photographs, faded and worn. There was a young woman with bright eyes and a warm smile, a child with a mop of unruly hair, a photo of a home bathed in the golden glow of a setting sun. "This is who I was, Captain," the butcher said, his voice barely audible. "This is what I lost. This is what I've been trying to forget. But it's always there, the memory, the pain, the longing." The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with emotion. Aelrin stared at the photographs, at the remnants of a life shattered by war, by the brutality of the human race. He saw a reflection of his own fears, his own prejudices, mirrored in the human pirate's eyes. The butcher leaned back, his hand resting on the ornate box. "This is my story, Captain. This is the truth of the butcher. I hope you can understand. I hope you can forgive." The word hung in the air, a challenge, a plea. Aelrin looked at the human pirate, at the man who had been a source of fear and terror, and saw something else. He saw the scars of war, the wounds of a broken soul, the pain of a man who yearned for redemption. Aelrin felt a strange sense of empathy, a stirring of compassion he had never expected to feel in the face of such a ruthless individual. He closed the box, his mind reeling. This encounter, this unlikely glimpse into the human pirate's soul, had opened a door, a window into a deeper truth, a truth that challenged his own perception of humans, of his own fears. And this truth, he knew, would change everything. The air in the cramped escape pod was thick with a cloying mixture of fear and desperation. The flickering emergency lights cast grotesque shadows on the faces of the huddled crew, each frozen in a silent tableau of apprehension. The butcher's ship, a monstrous silhouette against the star-strewn backdrop of the galactic trade lanes, loomed menacingly in the distance. Our ship, the Stargazer, lay a smoldering carcass, a testament to the human pirate's ruthless efficiency. Aelrin, his usually stoic countenance etched with lines of frustration, felt a surge of despair. We'd been so confident, so assured in our superiority. The butcher's attack had been swift, decisive, and utterly devastating. He'd exploited our complacency, our ingrained distrust of humans, and turned it into a weapon against us. Kiara, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with defiance, gripped the armrest of her seat. "We can't just stay here," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the pod's life support. "He'll find us." Narak, ever the pragmatist, scoffed. He won't find us if we don't let him. He tapped the pod's control panel, his long, spindly fingers tracing the glowing glyphs. This thing can jump into hyperspace. We just need to calibrate the coordinates. But we have no idea where to go, Aelrin said, his voice heavy with resignation. We were adrift in a sea of stars, our hopes for a prosperous trade run shattered by the humans' brutal assault. The Butcher had stripped us of our ship, our cargo, and most importantly, our sense of security. We have to go somewhere, Kiara insisted, her gaze fixed on Aelrin. We can't stay here and let him hunt us down. She met Aelrin's gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a nascent sense of defiance. Aelrin sighed, his gaze flickering towards the derelict hull of the Stargazer. He had been wrong, so terribly wrong. He'd underestimated the cunning and ruthlessness of the Butcher, allowing his ingrained prejudice to blind him to the danger lurking within the human's deceptively calm facade. He looked at Kiara, her determination mirroring his own. He could see the terror in her eyes, but he also saw the spark of courage, a spark he hadn't seen in himself. "We're going to jump," he announced, his voice firm, resolute. "But we're not going to run." Narek blinked, surprised. "You sure about that, Captain?" he asked, a flicker of apprehension in his voice. "We're talking about the Butcher here. He's not going to give us a second chance." "No," Aelrin replied, "he's not. But we're going to give him something unexpected. We're going to show him that even a human can be defeated, that even a pirate can be outsmarted." Kiara's eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting in their depths. Aelrin could feel the shift in the atmosphere within the pod. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was being replaced by something else, something more potent, something akin to defiance. "We're going to fight back," Kiara said, her voice low but firm. "We're going to show him that even a human can be defeated." The words echoed in the cramped pod, carrying the weight of their shared desperation, their shared defiance, and their newfound determination. As Narok began to calibrate the hyperspace coordinates, Aelrin knew this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their dignity, their future, and their belief in the possibility of redemption, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Butcher may be a human, but he was no monster. He was a man, and, just like any man, he had weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and a capacity for fear, and Aelrin intended to exploit every single one of them. The air in the ship's control room was thick with the scent of burnt circuits and the metallic tang of blood. The fight was over, but the quiet aftermath was even more unsettling. The human pirates, their swagger subdued, stood in a loose circle around the central console, their weapons still trained on the huddled figures of Aelrin and his crew. Kiara, her face streaked with soot and her eyes blazing with defiance, stood beside Aelrin. She felt a tremor in her legs, a testament to the adrenaline coursing through her veins, and the unsettling reality of the situation. The Butcher, his face a mask of stoic indifference, stood apart from the others, his eyes fixed on Aelrin. "You've fought well, Captain," the Butcher said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from the very depths of his being. "But you're outmatched. And as I said before, you've made a dangerous enemy. I've taken your ship, your cargo, and your reputation. But I have a proposition for you." Aelrin held his gaze, his stoic facade showing no signs of wavering. "And what, pray tell, is it you desire from me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at his insides. The Butcher stepped closer, his shadow falling over Aelrin. He chuckled a low, gravelly sound that sent a shiver down Kiara's spine. "I've heard rumors, Captain. Rumors of a rare artifact, something that could be of great value to me. Something you have aboard this very ship." Aelrin's eyes narrowed. "You speak of the Crystal of Lorne? It's a relic, a sacred object. It cannot be sold. I know its value, Captain, and I'm prepared to pay a price for it." The Butcher's words were laced with a strange earnestness, a glimmer of something deeper than his usual ruthlessness. He gestured to his men, who began to disperse, leaving only the Butcher and Aelrin in the center of the room. "Tell me, Captain," the Butcher said, his voice softer now, "what would a trade ship captain do for a chance to walk away from this? For a chance to clear his name and salvage what's left of his ship, to protect his crew and his life. Aelren's gaze flickered across the faces of his crew, each one pale and etched with exhaustion. He thought of Narak, his old and stoic engineer, whose hand trembled slightly as he held onto a broken console. He thought of the others, the young and naive, the seasoned and weary, each holding their own hopes and fears for their future. He looked back at the butcher, the human pirate's eyes boring into his own, an unsettling mix of menace and something that resembled pity. Aelren's heart hammered in his chest, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He knew the risks, knew the price of betrayal, the danger of dealing with a human pirate. But he also knew the price of standing firm, of clinging to his principles in the face of overwhelming odds. "What price are you willing to pay?" he said, his voice a mere whisper in a silent room. "For a chance to redeem yourself." The butcher's lips twitched into a flicker of a smile. "A chance to prove yourself, Captain. A chance to show me that humans are not all monsters." The air hung heavy with unspoken promises, the faintest echo of hope hanging in the air. Aelren stared into the depths of the butcher's eyes, a silent conversation passing between them in the flickering light. He saw a reflection in his own fear, in the desperation of the situation. He saw something he could understand, something he could perhaps even connect with. Aelren knew he was stepping into the unknown, into a game with stakes higher than he could have ever imagined. But deep down, a flicker of hope, a faint whisper of trust, had begun to take root in his heart. He knew that this was not the end, but the beginning of something new, something dangerous, something that could change the course of their lives forever. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of fear and the acrid bite of burnt circuitry. The main control room of the Serene Star was a battlefield, littered with severed cables, smoking consoles, and the remnants of a desperate struggle. The human pirate, the butcher, leaned against a deactivated console, his eyes glittering like cold steel under the flickering emergency lights. "You're stubborn," he said, his voice a low rumble, "but not entirely stupid. You see things for what they are, Captain Aelren." Aelren, his usually stoic face, etched with weary exhaustion, stared back, his alien eyes narrowed. "And you, butcher, are a predator disguised as a wolf in sheep's clothing." The butcher chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Wolves are straightforward, Captain. I'm more like a chameleon. I wear the colors you want to see until I don't need to anymore." "So, you're claiming to be something you are not?" Kiara, ever the pragmatist, intervened. She stood close to Aelren, her own fear tempered by a spark of defiance. "What's your game, butcher? What do you really want?" The butcher's gaze flickered to Kiara, a flicker of something akin to amusement crossing his face. "I want what every predator wants, little one. I want to survive. I want to thrive. And I want to be remembered, not as a monster, but as a legend." He paused, his eyes meeting Aelren's again. "I was once a legend, Captain. A legend of a different kind. A hero. But heroes, like planets, burn out. They leave scars, and those scars become wounds. And wounds need to be tended to, Captain. Even heroes need to find their way back." Aelren felt a strange tug at his heart. The butcher's words, raw and unvarnished, were unexpected. He saw glimpses of a broken man, a tormented soul, lurking beneath the hardened veneer of a ruthless pirate. "What scars do you carry, butcher?" Aelren asked, his voice softer than usual. The butcher's shoulders slumped, a rare display of vulnerability. "I thought I was saving my planet, Captain. I thought I was leading my people to a better future. But some things are better left untouched, buried deep in the ground." His gaze drifted to the window, revealing the swirling chaos of the galactic trade lane. "I'm not a hero anymore, Captain. I'm what's left after the flames have died out. But maybe, just maybe, you can help me find the embers. Maybe you can help me rekindle the fire." Aelren's gaze met Kiara's, a silent conversation passing between them. They were in uncharted territory, their beliefs challenged, their fears exposed. The butcher was a gamble, a dangerous one, but perhaps a necessary one. "What's your offer, butcher?" Aelren asked, his tone laced with wary curiosity. The butcher smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "I offer you a chance, Captain. A chance to save your ship, your crew, and your reputation. A chance to be remembered not as a victim, but as a hero." The air held its breath as Aelrin considered the offer, the weight of his crew's lives, the future of his ship, and the potential consequences of this encounter hanging heavy in the smoky silence. He knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The bargain had been struck, the terms set. The next chapter of their story was waiting to unfold, a story filled with unexpected allies, dangerous gambles, and a chance to break free from the chains of their own prejudices. The air in the ship's control room was thick with tension. Aelrin, his usually stoic face etched with concern, surveyed the makeshift barricade. It was a pathetic attempt at defense, a thin barrier of scrap metal and repurposed cargo crates standing between them and the butcher. "How much longer?" Kiara asked, her voice strained. She kept her gaze glued to the access hatch, her fingers nervously drumming against the console. "The warp drive is almost ready," Narak replied, his voice gravelly. He adjusted a set of wires, his eyes never leaving his work. "But we need to get out of this sector before the butcher can catch us." "He'll be waiting for us," Kiara said, her voice laced with dread. Aelrin nodded grimly. "We know that. But we can't stay here. His ship is faster, and he'll find us eventually. We need to make our gamble." "What gamble?" Narak asked, his eyebrows furrowed. "We send a message," Aelrin said, his gaze unwavering. "We tell him we're willing to negotiate. We tell him we're willing to surrender." Kiara gasped. "Aelrin, he'll never. He's a pirate. He's driven by greed, by chaos." "I understand your fear," Aelrin said, his tone calm but resolute. "But we have no other choice. We can't outrun him, and a direct confrontation is suicide. We must try to reason with him. We must try to appeal to whatever humanity he might still have." Narak snorted. "Humanity? You're talking about a man whose only known kindness is the way he cleans his weapons." "There's always a chance," Aelrin said, his voice firm. "He's not a mindless beast. He's a man with a past, with motivations, with perhaps even some sense of honor. We need to play our hand carefully, but we need to play it." Kiara stared at Aelrin, her brow furrowed. She knew the captain was right, but the thought of surrendering to the butcher, of putting their lives in the hands of this ruthless human, chilled her to the core. "What happens if he doesn't accept our offer?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Then we're lost," Aelrin said, his eyes meeting hers. "But if we don't try, we're lost anyway. We're running out of time. We must gamble on trust." He turned to Narak. "Prepare the message. Send it through the emergency comm channel, and make sure it's clear. We surrender. We are willing to listen to his terms." Narak nodded, his face grim. He began to type on the console, his fingers moving with practiced speed. The message was sent. Now, they could only wait. The silence in the control room was heavy, pregnant with anticipation and a gnawing fear that gnawed at their hearts. They couldn't escape the reality of their situation. They were at the mercy of a man who had already proven himself to be more than capable of brutality. But in the depths of that fear, a flicker of hope sparked. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had found a way to turn this desperate situation to their advantage. Perhaps this gamble on trust, however risky, was their only chance at survival. They could only wait and see if this seemingly impossible hope would blossom into reality. The air in the cramped escape pod was thick with tension, the metallic hum of the engines a constant reminder of our precarious situation. We were a motley crew, crammed into the tiny vessel. Captain Aelrin, his stoic face etched with worry, first mate Kiara, her eyes brimming with a newfound confidence, and Narak, the grizzled engineer, his usual cynicism replaced by a flicker of hope. We had been lucky, incredibly lucky. The butcher had offered a deal, a ludicrously dangerous one, but a deal nonetheless. We would deliver a specific cargo to a designated point in the galactic trade lanes, a cargo he refused to specify, and in return, he would release us and allow us to continue on our way. "This is madness, Aelrin," Narek grumbled, his voice barely audible over the whirring of the pod's engines. "Why would we trust him? He's a butcher, for crying out loud." Aelrin, ever the pragmatist, clasped his hands behind his back, his gaze fixed on the swirling nebula outside the pod's viewport. "We have no choice, Narek. We're outmatched, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. This is our only shot." "And what if he lies?" Kiara asked, her voice tight with fear. "What if he's playing us? We could end up worse off than if we'd stayed on the ship." "If he wanted to kill us," Aelrin said, his voice low and steady, "he would have done it already. There's something more to this, something he's not telling us." As the hours ticked by, the silence in the pod was broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional muttered comment from Narek. Kiara, ever the optimist, tried to distract herself by studying the intricate circuitry of the pod, while Aelrin remained lost in his thoughts, his eyes fixed on the ever-shifting nebula. Then, a voice crackled through the comm system, its rough edges rasping through the speakers. It was the butcher, and his voice was tinged with a strange mixture of amusement and urgency. "You're almost there, little birds. Just a few more jumps, and you'll reach your destination." Aelrin's response was immediate and sharp. "We'll be there, butcher. But what happens then? What's the cargo? And what's the guarantee you'll keep your word?" There was a moment of silence. Then the butcher's voice returned, a hint of a chuckle in its tone. "I'm not a man of promises, Captain, but I'm also not a liar. You'll know what the cargo is when you see it. And trust me, you'll want to deliver it." The butcher's words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Kiara exchanged a nervous glance with Narek, their fear palpable. Aelrin, however, remained unfazed, his face a mask of stoic determination. "Very well, butcher," he finally said, his voice firm and unwavering. "We'll deliver your cargo, but I want something in return." The butcher's voice crackled through the comm system, a rasping laugh echoing through the pod. "Oh, I'm sure you do, Captain. But what could I possibly offer a man who's about to deliver his very soul? Perhaps a little trust." The escape pod lurched, the engines straining as we entered the final jump. Aelrin gripped his seat, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes fixed on the blinding light that filled the pod. We were approaching the unknown, hurtling towards a destiny we could not control, and as the escape pod plunged into the darkness, the butcher's words echoed in our minds. "You'll know what the cargo is when you see it, and trust me, you'll want to deliver it." The air in the control room crackled with tension, the only sound besides the rhythmic hum of the ship's engines. Kiara, her normally bright eyes clouded with worry, stared at the flickering screens that displayed the ever-shifting chaos of the human pirate ship outside. The butcher's strategy, as unpredictable as a windstorm, had thrown their carefully crafted plans into disarray. "He's playing a dangerous game, Kiara," Narek said, his voice gruff, his hands working with practiced efficiency on the damaged console. "If we don't make a move soon, he'll bleed us dry before we even have a chance to scream." Kiara nodded, her mind racing. The butcher had managed to isolate them, splitting their crew into smaller groups, keeping them constantly on edge. There was a perverse logic to his tactics, a calculated ruthlessness that chilled Kiara to the bone. But there was something else, too, a sliver of uncertainty in his actions that she couldn't quite grasp. "What do you think he wants?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's his endgame?" Narek shrugged, his eyes never leaving the console. "Who knows? Maybe he just enjoys the thrill of the hunt. Maybe he's a sadist who relishes the fear he sows." Kiara's stomach tightened. "Or maybe there's something else, something human." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Narek glanced up, surprised. He hadn't expected that from Kiara. The butcher, a creature of pure brutality, had instilled fear in the entire crew. Kiara's words, though spoken softly, carried a weight that resonated through the tense silence. "Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment, Kiara," Narek said, his tone a mixture of concern and caution. "The butcher is not like us. He's a monster." "Maybe," Kiara said, but her gaze remained fixed on the screens. But even monsters have a reason. And maybe, just maybe, there's more to him than we think. Narak had no response. The words hung between them, a whisper of doubt in the face of overwhelming fear. He knew, deep down, that Kiara might be right. There had been moments, flashes of something, almost human, in the butcher's actions, a strange glint in his eyes that defied simple categorization. The news from the others wasn't encouraging. The butcher's crew was relentless, their tactics calculated and brutal. Aelrin was still locked in a tense standoff with the human pirate, their words a dangerous dance around a simmering fury. The butcher's chilling words, "You are not so different from me," echoed in Kiara's mind, stirring a cold dread. Suddenly, a shrill alarm blared, jolting Kiara from her thoughts. Narak cursed under his breath. The butcher's tactics were evolving. He was attempting to destabilize their ship's core systems. "He's trying to cripple us," Narak yelled, his hands moving with frantic speed on the console. "Keep the power flowing, Kiara. We have to hold on." Kiara jumped into action, her fingers flying across the control panel. She felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through her, a fierce determination to hold their ship together. The butcher's tactics were ruthless, but she wouldn't let him break them. As the alarm continued to blare, filling the control room with a symphony of urgent beeps and flashing lights, Kiara couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the butcher than met the eye. He was a storm, unpredictable and dangerous, but perhaps, beneath the chaos, there was a whisper of truth waiting to be heard. And she was determined to find it, even if it meant facing the storm itself. The air inside the command center hummed with a tense quietude. Narak, his three eyes focused on the blinking lights of the ship's consoles, muttered under his breath, "This is getting ridiculous. We've been playing hide and seek for hours, and the butcher hasn't even bothered to look for us." Aelrin, his face etched with worry, paced restlessly. "He's playing a game, Narak. He wants us to believe he's lost interest, so we'll relax our guard. It's a trap, I'm sure of it." Kiara, her antennae twitching with anxiety, glanced nervously at Aelrin. "I think we should try and contact the butcher. Perhaps we can negotiate a truce." Aelrin scoffed. "Negotiate with a human pirate? You're forgetting who we're dealing with, Kiara. They don't understand reason. They only understand force." Suddenly, a sharp crackle from the comms panel startled them. A distorted voice, gruff and laced with a sardonic humor, filled the room. Well, look who's decided to come out of hiding. Thought you'd be clever enough to stay tucked away in your little corner of the ship forever." It was the butcher. Aelrin's heart pounded in his chest. He had been right. The silence had been a ploy. The butcher was waiting for them to make their move. "We could have stayed longer if you hadn't decided to play your little game," Kiara retorted, her voice calm but laced with defiance. "Oh, I know you could have," the butcher chuckled, the rasp in his voice sending chills down Kiara's spine. "But you're a clever one, aren't you? Figured out I'm not the monstrous brute you imagine, eh?" Kiara felt an unexpected pang of guilt at his words. He wasn't wrong. The butcher hadn't executed anyone. His crew had shown a surprising amount of restraint. He'd even helped them rescue a few of their crewmates from the pirates' clutches. Aelrin, seeing Kiara hesitate, pressed forward. "We are not concerned with your games, butcher. We wish to discuss terms. We will pay the ransom for our cargo, and you can have our ship. Just let us go." The butcher's laughter was chilling. "A ransom? You think you can buy your way out of this? You're pathetic. This isn't about the cargo, it's about something much bigger. You've been interfering in my business, and I don't forgive easily." Kiara steeled herself, her antennae drooping with fear. Aelrin's words rang in her ears. "They don't understand reason." The butcher continued, his voice grave. "But perhaps there's a way you can repay me. I need someone to help me, someone who understands the trade lanes, someone who's not afraid of taking risks." Aelrin scoffed. "You're expecting us to join you. You're insane." "No, Captain," the butcher countered, his voice a low rumble. "I'm offering you an opportunity. The opportunity to change your destiny. to escape the monotony of your predictable life, to become something more. Elrin looked at Kiara, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and intrigue. He saw a flicker of something else in them, a spark of ambition, a desire for something more than the safe, predictable life they'd known. He felt a strange tug within him, a conflict between his fear and the glimmer of something new, something exciting. The butcher had just planted a seed of doubt in his mind, a seed that might just blossom into something dangerous. "We'll consider your offer," Elrin replied, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't an acceptance, but it wasn't a refusal either. He knew, deep down, that this encounter with the butcher wasn't over. It was only the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter in their lives. The air in the cramped escape pod was thick with tension. Kiara, her face pale and streaked with grime, stared out the viewport at the swirling nebula that surrounded them. Their ship, the Starlight Wanderer, was a tiny speck lost in the vastness of space, a testament to their desperate escape. Elrin, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by a weariness that etched deep lines into his face, sat beside her. The weight of responsibility, the fear for his crew, and the unexpected turn of events had left him drained. He had never imagined that they would be forced to flee, leaving their home behind in such a haphazard way. "We shouldn't have trusted him," Kiara muttered, her voice barely a whisper. "He's a human. Humans can't be trusted." Elrin turned to her, his eyes filled with a strange mix of sadness and resignation. "He gave us a choice, Kiara. He could have taken everything, including our lives. He chose to let us go." "But at what cost?" Kiara shot back, her voice brittle with anger. "He stole our cargo, our reputation, and now our ship. We're stranded, adrift in the void. What choice did we really have?" "He saved us from a worse fate," Elrin argued, his voice low. "He could have taken our lives, or worse, kept us as prisoners. He bargained with us, Kiara. He offered us a chance to live. We chose to take it. A chance to live as refugees, with nothing but the clothes on our backs," Kiara countered, bitterness lacing her words. "This isn't a victory, Captain. This is defeat." Elrin remained silent, his eyes fixed on the nebula swirling outside. He understood her frustration, her anger. He felt it too. But there was something else, a flicker of intrigue, a sliver of understanding that he couldn't quite shake. The butcher, despite his ruthless ways, had shown them a glimmer of something unexpected. He had revealed a human side, a vulnerability that ran beneath his hardened exterior. He had spoken of his past, the pain that fueled his actions, the yearning for something beyond the brutality of his life. He had offered them a chance to live, a chance to rebuild, a chance to find a new path. "We can rebuild," Elrin said, his voice unexpectedly firm. "We can find a new ship, a new crew. We'll start over. But first, we need to understand him. We need to understand why he did what he did." Kiara looked at him, a flicker of doubt warring with a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "Why? Why bother? He's just a human, a monster." Elrin shook his head. "He's more than that, Kiara. He's a human, just like the rest. Just like us. We have to understand that before we can move forward." The escape pod shuddered slightly, then fell silent. The nebula spun, shimmering with an array of colors, a silent testament to the vastness of the cosmos. Elrin and Kiara were adrift, their future uncertain, but in that shared silence, something had begun to shift. Beyond the fear and the loss, a flicker of hope had ignited, a faint ember of understanding. They were adrift, yes, but they were also alive. And in the face of the unknown, they had a chance, a fragile chance, to find their way back to what mattered most. The air thrummed with tension, thick as the lingering smoke from the battle that had just ended. Elrin stood before the butcher, their gazes locked in a silent struggle. The human pirate, his face marred by a scar that slashed across his cheek, leaned against a bulkhead, blood staining his tattered jacket. Elrin's own uniform was ripped and scorched, a testament to the chaos they had just endured. "You're a strange one, Elrin," the butcher rasped, his voice a gravelly echo in the silent chamber. "You talk about honor, about law, but you fight like a cornered animal." Aelrin's stoicism wavered. He knew the truth in the human's words. He had fought with a savagery he never thought possible, driven by desperation and a primal fear for his crew. "We were afraid," he admitted, his voice low. "We'd heard stories about you, the Butcher. Stories of a man who'd strip a ship bare and leave its crew to die." The Butcher chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Stories are told by those who survive." He paused, his gaze hardening. "But you've survived, Aelrin. You've seen the worst of me, and you're still standing." Aelrin's gaze flickered towards the escape pod, its door still open. The Butcher had offered them a chance to flee, a lifeline to their former lives. But Kiara, her eyes shining with an unexpected resolve, had refused. "Our lives were in your hands," Aelrin said, meeting the Butcher's gaze. "You could have taken them. You could have destroyed us. Why didn't you?" The Butcher's expression softened, a flicker of something almost human passing across his face. "Because I'm tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of killing." He turned away, his voice strained. "I haven't had a decent meal in months, Aelrin. Hell, I haven't seen the sun in years." Aelrin's heart ached for the man. The Butcher, the monster they'd feared, was just another soul adrift in the vastness of space. "We could help you, the Butcher," Aelrin offered, surprised at the words leaving his lips. "We could get you off this life." The Butcher scoffed. "You think I haven't considered that? You think I haven't dreamt of a life where I could see my family again?" He stared at Aelrin, his eyes filled with a sorrow that cut deeper than any blade. "But I'm a marked man, Aelrin. I'm not worth saving." Aelrin took a step closer. "We'll stand with you," he said, his voice gaining strength. "We'll fight for your freedom, for your chance at a new life." A long silence hung between them. Then the Butcher smiled, a slow, weary smile that revealed a glimmer of hope. "You're a strange one, Aelrin," the Butcher said, his voice tinged with a hint of disbelief. "A strange, honorable one. I'll take your offer." Aelrin felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The Butcher, the human pirate, had become a burden, a constant threat hanging over their future. But now a new possibility emerged, a path towards a resolution far more complex and nuanced than they had imagined. As Narek hurried towards them, his tools clinking with each step, Aelrin knew this wasn't the end of their journey. Instead, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, but also with the faintest promise of hope. They had stared into the abyss, seen the worst of humanity, and it had stared back. But they had also found a flicker of humanity within the darkness, a chance for redemption that transcended their differences. They had a long way to go, but for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, Aelrin felt a glimmer of hope for their future, for their ship, and for the strange, desperate human who had become their unlikely ally. The air crackled with tension. The Butcher stood at the helm of the bridge, his keen eyes scanning the holographic map, tracing their escape route. He had the alien captain, Aelrin, pinned, a hand resting on the hilt of his plasma blade, a silent threat hanging in the air. "You've made a grave mistake," Aelrin rasped, his voice hoarse with fear and exhaustion. "You'll never escape with the cargo, not without our help. And your reputation, it will be tarnished beyond repair." The Butcher chuckled, a hollow sound that echoed through the bridge. "Reputation? My dear captain, I haven't had one in years. I'm not chasing glory, just trying to survive. And that means getting my hands on the resources you're carrying." "We've already offered you a compromise," Kiara interjected, stepping forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her legs. "We'll give you a percentage of the cargo. It's more than enough for your needs. But if you destroy the ship." The Butcher turned, his eyes meeting Kiara's. There was a glint of something in his gaze, curiosity, maybe, or even a hint of grudging respect. "You're a bold one," he said, his voice softer now. "Perhaps you've got more guts than your captain. He's too concerned with his blasted reputation." He looked back at Aelrin. "You've lived too long, Captain. You think your precious life is worth more than these." He gestured towards the rest of the crew, hidden in the shadows, their fear palpable. These lives are worth nothing to you." Aelren's face contorted with anger, but he held himself back. Kiara, however, couldn't restrain her fury. "We're not worth nothing," she spat. "We're individuals, just like you. We have families, dreams, and stories to tell." The butcher's expression softened, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "Stories," he murmured. "I have stories too. But most of them end in pain. It's the only thing I know." He looked back at Aelren. "Tell you what, Captain," he said, his voice regaining its edge. "I'll let your crew live, but I'm taking the cargo, and I'm leaving you stranded. A little taste of your own fear, and a lesson in the consequences of standing in my way." Aelren glanced at Kiara, a silent plea in his eyes. She knew what he was thinking. They couldn't fight the butcher, not with his crew waiting in the wings. There was only one option left. "We can help you," she said, her voice firm. "We know these trade lanes better than anyone. We can get you to the safest jump point, the one that's hidden from everyone but us." The butcher paused, his eyes narrowing. "You think I'm naive enough to trust you?" "We've already shown you that we're willing to compromise," Kiara said. "We'll make this worth your while, even if it means sacrificing our reputation. But we need to know why you're doing this. You're not just a simple pirate, are you?" A long silence stretched between them. The butcher's face tightened, his eyes filled with a dark fire. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair, his expression a whirlwind of emotions. "Fine," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You want a story? Here's one. I was once a soldier, a hero, until they betrayed me, stole everything I held dear, left me with nothing but the scars of war and a thirst for vengeance. I've been running from that darkness ever since." He met Kiara's gaze, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through his hard shell. "This cargo, it's the only way I can get back what they took from me. It's a chance for redemption, a chance to even the score." He turned back to Aelren, his voice laced with steel. "But if you interfere, I'll make sure you understand the true meaning of pain." The clock was ticking. The escape pod was ready, their last hope for survival. Aelren looked at Kiara, a silent question hanging in the air. The weight of their decision pressed down on them, a choice that would shape their future. The fate of their ship, their cargo, and the human pirate lay in their hands. The air hung heavy with tension, the silence punctuated only by the soft hum of the ship's engines. Outside, the vast emptiness of space pressed against the viewport, mirroring the void that had settled over the crew's hearts. Aelren, his face a mask of weary exhaustion, stood at the helm, his hand hovering near the communicator. He had just made a decision, a choice that weighed heavily on his conscience. Kiara, her eyes wide with apprehension, stood beside him. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ship's low thrum. Aelren took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the void beyond the viewport. "It's the only way. We can't afford to lose the ship, or worse, face the consequences of defying the butcher." Kiara's gaze drifted to the closed hatch leading to the holding cell where the butcher was being kept. "But what about the cargo? And our reputation? What will our people think?" Aelren, his brow furrowed, turned to face her. "This is not about what our people think, Kiara. It's about survival. We've already lost so much. More lives are at stake if we try to fight him again. We have to be smart." Narak, his wizened face creased with worry, emerged from the engineering bay, holding a data pad. "Captain, the engines are stabilized, but we're barely holding together. We need to make a decision soon. The butcher's ship is still out there." Aelren nodded, his grip tightening on the helm. He turned back to the viewport, his gaze sweeping across the vast, star-strewn darkness. Beneath the shimmering constellations, the specter of the butcher's ship hung like a dark cloud on the horizon, a constant reminder of their perilous situation. The butcher had made his demands. They had to surrender half their remaining cargo, their most valuable assets, stolen from a rival trade alliance, and the butcher would leave them with a minimal amount of escape pods to flee. It was a cruel offer, a testament to the human pirate's calculating nature, but it was the only chance they had at survival. Suddenly, the communicator crackled to life. The butcher's gruff voice cut through the silence. "Aelrin, you're taking too long. Is this how you treat guests? Don't make me come in there and teach you some manners." Aelrin swallowed, forcing down the fear that clawed at his throat. He tightened his grip on the communicator and spoke in a calm, unwavering tone. "We agree to your terms, the butcher. We will surrender the designated cargo." The silence on the other end stretched into a tense eternity. Then, the butcher's voice returned, laced with a hint of amusement. "Smart choice, Captain. I appreciate a quick negotiation. Now, prepare the cargo transfer." As Aelrin relayed the decision to his crew, he felt a mix of emotions: relief, shame, and a gnawing sense of defeat. He had done what he had to do to ensure their survival, but it was a victory tainted by compromise and a heavy burden on his soul. The crew, their faces grim and silent, went about their duties. They loaded their precious cargo onto the waiting transport ships, their hearts sinking with every crate they moved. It was the lifeblood of their business, the product of months of hard work and meticulous planning. And now, it was being surrendered to a ruthless human pirate. Kiara, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow, watched as their valuable trade goods were loaded onto the transport ships. "This isn't right, Captain," she muttered. "We're giving him everything. He's going to walk away with everything we've worked for." Aelrin placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze meeting hers. "I know, Kiara. I know," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But it's a necessary sacrifice. We have to survive." The butcher's voice crackled over the communicator, alerting them that the transport ships were ready to depart. The crew, their faces etched with a mixture of weariness and resignation, gathered at the airlock. The butcher's ship remained a dark presence on the horizon, a silent observer of their surrender. As the transport ships streaked away, carrying with them their valuable cargo, Aelrin felt a pang of guilt. He had chosen survival, but he had also chosen to betray a part of his own values, a part of his culture. He had given in to fear, and that was a bitter pill to swallow. But as he gazed into the vast, star-studded darkness, a flicker of hope began to ignite within him. He had saved his crew, and, in a strange twist of fate, he had also witnessed a surprising aspect of human nature. The butcher had spared them, not out of mercy, but out of a twisted sense of pragmatism. He had let them live, despite the fact that he could have easily destroyed them. And that, Aelrin realized, was a powerful testament to the complexity of human nature, a nature that was capable of both extraordinary cruelty and unexpected compassion. Aelrin, his gaze fixed on the receding transport ships, knew this encounter had changed him. He had faced his own prejudices and learned a crucial lesson about survival, a lesson he would carry with him as he navigated the perilous waters of the galactic trade lanes. The human pirate had forced him to confront his fears and his blind faith in his own species' superior morality. Perhaps, Aelrin thought, there was more to humans than he had ever imagined. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't the only ones capable of finding common ground amidst the vastness and chaos of the universe. The air crackled with anticipation. Narak, his face illuminated by the flickering green light of the ship's emergency power, tightened the last bolt on the escape pod's access panel. Sweat beaded on his brow, mixing with the grime of countless repairs. This wasn't just any escape pod. It was their lifeline, their chance to break free from the butcher's iron grip. "Ready, Captain?" Kiara asked, her voice tight with apprehension. She stood beside Aelrin, her sleek form tense, eyes scanning the cluttered engineering bay. Aelrin, usually unreadable, looked weary. The weight of their predicament, the fear for his crew, the revelation of the butcher's past, it all seemed to have worn on him. "As ready as I'll ever be," he said, his voice gruff. "Narak, are you sure this will hold?" Narak, ever the pragmatist, chuckled. "It'll hold, Captain, just like it always has." The butcher's ship, a hulking shadow against the backdrop of the distant nebula, loomed menacingly. The alien crew had been forced to abandon their own ship, leaving behind their life's work, their cargo, their very identity. The escape pod, a tiny speck in the face of such vastness, was their only hope. "We're going to need more than luck to get past him," Kiara said, her voice a low whisper. "He's not going to let us go easily." Aelren's gaze met hers, his eyes hardening. "We have to try, Kiara. For the crew, for ourselves." The escape pod hummed with energy, its systems coming online. Kiara adjusted the controls, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. "He's coming, Captain. What's the plan?" "We launch. We use the nebula's interference to mask our signal. We make for the nearest trade outpost," Aelren said, his voice firm. "It's a long shot, but it's all we have." As the pod hissed to life, they saw a small figure emerge from the depths of their ship. The butcher, his weathered face gaunt yet resolute, stood in the doorway. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, held something else, a flicker of regret, a ghost of the humanity that had long been buried beneath his hardened exterior. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, his voice rasping, a stark contrast to the gruff tones they were accustomed to. "But I can't let you leave." Aelren stared at him, his surprise palpable. This was not the ruthless pirate they had come to fear. This was a man who seemed to be struggling with the weight of his own choices. "We have no choice," Aelren said, his voice low. "We're leaving." "I know," the butcher said, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "But stay close. We can't let them catch us. Not yet." The butcher's words were a revelation. Their enemy, the man who had taken everything from them, was not simply a monster. He was a man burdened with a past he couldn't escape, and for a moment Aelren saw a glimmer of hope in the darkness. The escape pod launched, disappearing into the swirling chaos of the nebula. The butcher, a silhouette against the swirling nebula, watched them go, his face etched with a mixture of sadness and determination. He was not the only one who had been irrevocably changed by this encounter. Aelren realized that he, too, had been changed. He could no longer see humans as simply a threat. He had seen a glimpse of vulnerability, of remorse, of the very essence of humanity behind the grimace of a pirate. Their escape, a desperate gamble, was just the beginning. The nebula, a vast and unforgiving expanse, awaited, hiding secrets and dangers. But for now, they had a chance. A chance for freedom, and maybe, just maybe, a chance for understanding. The silence in the escape pod was a symphony of tension. The air hummed with the hum of the ship's emergency systems, the only sound aside from the rhythmic breaths of the 5 beings crammed inside. Aelren, his usual stoic composure replaced by a flicker of anxiety, stared at the flickering red lights on the control panel. Kiara, normally brimming with confidence, gnawed on her lower lip, her eyes fixed on the closed hatch. Narek sat hunched in the corner, his usually cynical humor replaced by a grim determination. The butcher, his back against the opposite wall, remained an enigma. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd entered the escape pod, his gaze fixed on the hatch as if he could see through it. He was a shadow in the flickering light, his face obscured by the darkness, his past a mystery that continued to haunt the present. "You've got a strange way of showing gratitude," Aelren finally said, his voice rough. He couldn't help but be wary, even with the butcher's assistance in their escape. The butcher simply shrugged, his bulky figure shifting slightly. "I'm not here for gratitude, Captain. I'm here for a deal." "A deal?" Kiara scoffed. "You mean like the one where you threatened to blow up our ship? You're not exactly known for your fair market practices, Mr. Butcher." The butcher chuckled, a low rumble that held a hint of amusement. "I'm a businessman, Kiara. You know how it is, gotta negotiate from a position of strength." "We're hardly in a position of strength right now," Narek muttered, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "That's where the deal comes in," the butcher said, his gaze flicking to Narek. "I need you to fix my ship. I'll get you back to your own. And in return, you give me something. A chance to prove I'm not a monster." Aelren's brows furrowed. "And what makes you think we'd trust you?" "Because," the butcher said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "you have no other choice. The only one who knows how to fix my ship is right here, and the only one who can get you out of this mess is me." The silence returned, heavy with unspoken truths. The butcher's words, while tinged with a chillingly familiar ruthlessness, contained a sliver of something else. A vulnerability, a desperation they had never witnessed before. Kiara, ever the pragmatist, spoke first. "We're in a lose-lose situation, Captain. If we stay here, we die. If we go back, we're at the butcher's mercy. But at least this gives us a chance." Aelrin considered her words, a silent struggle in his eyes. The butcher's offer was a gamble, a dangerous game that could cost them dearly. But it was also a chance, a sliver of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. "All right," Aelrin said, his voice firm. "We'll fix your ship. But if you betray us, you'll regret it." The butcher's smile was a flicker of dark humor. "You'll have to be the judge of that." As Norak rummaged through his tools, Aelrin and Kiara exchanged wary glances. The butcher's offer was a gamble, a risky proposition with the potential for catastrophic consequences. But in the face of a human pirate, they had found themselves playing a dangerous game of trust. And in this game, as the escape pod hurtled through the vastness of the galaxy, there was only one rule: survive. The air in the escape pod was thick with the metallic tang of adrenaline and the faint scent of ozone, a lingering reminder of the chaos that had unfolded moments before. Kiara, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, gripped the control panel, her gaze fixed on the swirling nebula that filled the viewport. Beyond the cosmic tapestry of gas and dust, the human ship, the butcher's vessel, vanished into the deep void, a silent testament to their daring escape. "Are we really free?" Narak's voice, gruff and laced with disbelief, broke the silence. He was slumped against the wall, his gaze distant, seemingly lost in the swirling patterns of the nebula. Kiara, her mind still reeling from the adrenaline rush, simply nodded, unable to form words. The escape pod, a sleek, metallic capsule designed for quick, silent getaways, felt suffocatingly small after the vast expanse of their trade ship. The journey back to civilization was long, filled with an uncertain future. Aelrin, his face etched with fatigue and the weight of countless decisions, sat beside Kiara. He didn't speak, but his gaze, fixed on the starry expanse, mirrored the tumultuous emotions brewing inside him. The encounter with the butcher had left an indelible mark on their collective psyche, shattering their carefully constructed beliefs and leaving them grappling with the unforeseen complexities of humanity. "I never thought I'd be grateful for a human," Kiara said, her voice barely a whisper. The words, a stark contrast to her usual bravado, hung heavy in the air. "Grateful?" Narek scoffed, his cynicism a familiar shield. "He nearly killed us all. The only reason we are alive is because he needs us to find the artifact." Aelrin, his gaze still fixed on the swirling nebula, spoke softly. "He gave us a choice, Narek. A choice to fight for our lives, to escape. He could have easily killed us all, but he gave us a chance." Norak remained silent, his skepticism evident in the set of his jaw. The escape plan, a desperate gamble hatched in the throes of panic, had left them with a fragile lifeline. The artifact, a legendary device supposedly capable of manipulating time, was the only thing the butcher wanted. They had become pawns in a game far beyond their comprehension. "We have to understand him, Norak," Kiara said, her voice gaining a newfound confidence. "His motives, his past. We can't just judge him based on his actions. He's more than just a monster." Norak looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. He knew Kiara was fearless, but this new conviction, this unexpected empathy, surprised him. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the terror that had gripped her during the attack. Now, a quiet strength, born of a newfound understanding, radiated from her. "I don't know about that, Kiara," Narek said, his voice softer than usual. The encounter with the butcher had shaken his cynicism, planting seeds of doubt in his hardened heart. "But I understand why you think so." Aelrin, finally turning to face them, met Kiara's gaze. "We have to find a way to live with this, to find a way to move forward. We owe it to ourselves, to each other, to find peace with what has happened." His words, spoken with a quiet finality, resonated through the escape pod. The journey back was long, a journey filled with uncertainty and doubt, yet a glimmer of hope, a nascent understanding, flickered in the hearts of the alien crew. They had survived, but the encounter with the Butcher had irrevocably changed them, forcing them to confront their prejudices and embrace the complexities of the universe, even the darkest, most human corners of it. As the escape pod hurtled through the vast expanse of space, towards an uncertain future, a profound question hung in the air. What does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to be truly free? The air hung heavy with a metallic scent of burnt circuitry and fear. The Butcher's ship, a ravenous beast of metal and fire, loomed over our own, its shadow a suffocating blanket against the swirling nebula beyond. Kiara, still clutching the tattered remnants of her escape pod, stared at the battered hull of our ship, her face etched with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "We're alive," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's dying systems. "For now," Narek grumbled, his eyes scanning the mangled control panel with a practiced eye. "But we're stranded, and that Butcher is still out there." Aelrin scanned the battlefield with a grim gaze. The Butcher's ship, a silent behemoth, had ceased its attack, its cannons smoking like wounds on a giant's arm. He could almost sense the human pirate's brooding presence within, his gaze like a predator's, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We need to get to the escape pods," he declared, his voice firm despite the tremor in his heart. "But first, we need to secure the energy core. Narek, can you stabilize it?" Narek, ever the pragmatist, nodded curtly. "Give me a few minutes. I'll try to get something going. What's the plan once we're powered up?" "We'll take the escape pods," Aelrin said, his voice tense. "But we're not going to run. We're going to negotiate." Kiara's brow furrowed. "Negotiate? With that monster?" "He's not a monster, Kiara," Aelrin said, his tone softer than usual. "He's human. He has his reasons. We need to understand them if we want to survive this." Kiara's gaze flickered towards the Butcher's ship, her expression unreadable. Aelrin understood her apprehension. The Butcher's cruelty, his ruthless tactics, had etched a deep fear in their hearts. But Aelrin had seen something else in the human's eyes, an emptiness, a despair that mirrored their own. "We're going to offer him a trade," Aelrin continued, his voice firm. "We'll give him what he wants, but he has to let us go. He has to promise to leave our crew alone." "And if he says no?" Narek asked, his voice betraying a hint of skepticism. "Then we'll fight," Aelrin said, his gaze fixed on the Butcher's ship. "But we fight as a crew. We stand together, and we don't break." The tension in the air crackled like static electricity. Aelrin, despite his doubts, felt a flicker of hope. He had lost his pride, his ship, his cargo, but he had not lost his crew. And in that shared vulnerability, a strange sense of unity blossomed. It was a fragile bond, forged in the fires of desperation, but it was a bond nonetheless. He glanced at Kiara, her eyes wide with fear, but also with a glimmer of defiance. He saw a strength, a courage that he had not seen before. The Butcher had brought them to the brink, but he had also revealed something deeper within them, a resilience, a will to survive that transcended their differences. As Narek's gruff voice announced the energy core was stabilized, Aelrin raised his chin. He had a plan, a dangerous gamble, but it was a gamble they had to take. "Time to talk to the Butcher," Aelrin said, his voice low but strong. "We have a deal to make." He knew it might be the last deal of their lives. The air hung heavy with a metallic tang of burnt wiring and the acrid smell of ozone. Smoke snaked lazily through the corridors of the trade ship, a testament to the chaotic struggle that had just transpired. Aelrin, his normally stoic features etched with weariness, surveyed the scene. Kiara, leaning against a bulkhead, her breath coming in ragged gasps, met his gaze. "The Butcher's gone," she said, her voice hoarse from shouting orders. "He took most of his crew with him." "Took?" Aelrin's brow furrowed. "You mean he abandoned ship?" "No," Kiara shook her head, her eyes flickering with a mix of fear and defiance. "He took the cargo hold. He took the core." Aelrin's stomach lurched. The core? Their prized cargo, the highly sought-after interstellar dust that powered their entire operation. It was gone. Stolen. In a single, ruthless act, the butcher had crippled their ship and their livelihood. Narak, who had been tending to a wounded crewmate, limped over, a grimace on his face. The ship's damaged. We lost half the engines. It'll be a miracle if we even make it back to our home port. But the core, Aelrin started, his voice raw with disbelief. Gone, Narek confirmed, and there's nothing we can do about it. Not now. The heavy silence that followed was broken only by the hiss of escaping air from a ruptured vent. Aelrin stared at the flickering emergency lights, the shadows playing grotesque tricks on his tired mind. He felt a wave of despair wash over him. They had been so close to completing their mission, to finally returning home after months of arduous travel. And now they were stranded, their ship damaged, their cargo stolen, their reputation in tatters. Kiara, sensing his despondency, approached him, her eyes full of a determination that surprised Aelrin. "Captain, we still have a chance. We might lose the core, but we can still get to the escape pod." "But that would be abandoning the ship," Aelrin said, his voice strained. Kiara's gaze hardened. "It would be survival, Captain. We can't sit here and wait for the butcher to come back for us." Aelrin knew Kiara was right. They had fought bravely, they had survived against impossible odds. But they had also lost, and the consequences were far-reaching. They were in a desperate situation, and they had no time for pride. "All right," Aelrin said, his voice firm. "Let's get to the escape pod." They gathered the remaining crew, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes reflecting the grim reality of their situation. As they made their way towards the escape pod, Aelrin couldn't help but feel a sense of loss, not only for the cargo they had lost, but for the trust they had placed in their own judgment. He had underestimated the butcher, believed him to be a mindless brute, a threat they could overcome with brute force. He had failed to see the cunning beneath the brutality, the calculating mind behind the chaos. But for now, the only thing that mattered was survival. They had to escape, to get out of this mangled ship before it was too late. They reached the escape pod, a small, cramped vessel designed for emergencies. As they jostled inside, the ship shuddered violently, the engine sputtering like a dying beast. Aelrin pressed his face against the viewport, watching the swirling nebula outside, feeling a pang of longing for the familiarity of their home planet. He looked at Kiara, her eyes reflecting the fear and uncertainty of their situation. But there was also a spark of defiance, a glimmer of hope that fueled Aelrin's own resolve. "Kiara," Aelrin began, his voice tinged with weariness. "We've lost a lot." Kiara nodded, her eyes meeting his. "But we're still alive, Captain, and we'll get through this." "We will," Aelrin agreed. "We'll get through this." But he couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter with the butcher had changed them, that their journey would never be the same. They had seen the true face of human ruthlessness. They had lost their cargo, their ship, and a piece of their innocence. Yet they had also learned, understood, and adapted. The butcher's brutality had revealed a disturbing truth. Humans, like any species, were capable of both darkness and light. And maybe, just maybe, there was a glimmer of humanity, even in a pirate they knew only as the butcher. As the escape pod hurtled through the void, Aelrin looked at the stars, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. They were adrift, yet they were also free. Their journey had been disrupted, their plans shattered, but they would survive, they would adapt, they would learn, and they would never forget the lesson learned in the shadow of the butcher. The air inside the ship hummed with tension. The butcher, his face etched with a mix of amusement and something else Aelrin couldn't quite decipher, leaned against the control console, his eyes fixed on the flickering screen. The human pirate's fingers drummed a staccato rhythm against the polished metal, a chilling counterpoint to the silence of the crew. "Looks like we're in a bit of a pickle," the butcher drawled, his voice a low growl. "My little surprise hasn't quite worked out as planned. Seems your ship's a bit more resilient than I thought." Aelrin, his heart hammering against his ribs, held his own gaze. "We are tenacious, human, as are our ships." "Tenacious? More like stubbornly stupid," Narek muttered under his breath. But the butcher, As if he could hear the engineer's silent observation, turned his head slightly, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Indeed," the butcher said, his voice softening. "But you've proven surprisingly resourceful." He pointed at the screen, where a holographic map displayed their current location. "We're in a dead zone. No way to call for reinforcements. Not that I need them anyway. This is a personal matter, Captain. You see, I have a fondness for your ship." Aelren's gut twisted. He'd heard whispers of this fondness on the trade lanes, tales of ships stripped bare, crews left to drift. But he'd dismissed them as mere rumors, desperate attempts by those who'd crossed paths with the butcher to justify their own failures. "You're lying," Aelren said, the words sharp as shards of frozen ice. "You want what we carry, the cargo, the spoils." The butcher chuckled, a sound like wind whistling through a tomb. "Spoils? Captain, you make me sound like a common raider. My methods are more refined. I prefer to collect things. And this ship, with its intricate technology and design, is a true gem, a rare find." Kiara, watching the exchange, felt a chill run down her spine. There was something sinister in the way the butcher looked at the ship, a predatory gleam in his eyes. It reminded her of the stories she'd heard as a child, tales of beings who collected trophies, bones, and teeth from their prey. "What do you want from us?" Aelren pressed, his voice tight. "What are your terms?" The butcher turned his head back towards the screen, his gaze tracing the intricate lines of their ship's trajectory. "Terms? Now that is an interesting word, Captain. I'll give you two choices. Either you agree to help me find something I'm looking for, something quite precious and quite dangerous, or you can choose to leave. You can use the escape pods and give me the ship. It's a simple choice, really." The butcher's words were deceptively casual, but his eyes held a glint of steel, a promise of violence that hung in the air like a silent threat. Aelren understood the choice laid before him. To stay meant to gamble a dangerous dance with a predator. To leave meant surrendering all they'd built, their legacy, their pride. "What are you looking for?" Kiara asked, her voice cutting through the tension. It was a question that echoed in everyone's mind. They had to know what they were dealing with, what danger they were facing. The butcher smiled, a chilling twist of his lips. "That, my dear, is for you to find out." He turned to Aelren, his eyes boring into the captain's. "Choose wisely, Captain. Your choice will determine the fate of your crew." The air hung thick with the metallic tang of burnt metal and the acrid scent of fear. The butcher stood, bathed in the flickering light of the ship's emergency power, a figure of brutal calm amidst the chaos. His crimson eyes, the only part of him not concealed by the thick armor of his suit, surveyed the survivors huddled in the dimly lit corridor. Well," he drawled, his voice a low rumble that echoed with chilling indifference. "Looks like we have ourselves a little audience." Aelren, his face etched with a mixture of fury and exhaustion, stepped forward. He'd lost more than half his crew, and the familiar ache of grief gnawed at his heart. But he knew he couldn't show weakness. Not now. "You've already taken enough," Aelren rasped, his voice hoarse with the effort of containment. "Leave us, and we'll forget this ever happened." The butcher chuckled, a sound like gravel grinding against steel. "Forget? You think that's how it works? You're not just some insignificant cargo, Captain. You're a message, a reminder." Kiara, her emerald eyes narrowed, stepped beside Aelren. "That doesn't make any sense. What message?" The butcher's gaze drifted to Kiara, a flicker of something akin to amusement in his crimson eyes. "You'll understand soon enough," he said, his voice turning colder. "But for now, let's discuss the terms of our arrangement." He gestured toward a wall panel, its display flickering with the faint glow of emergency power. "I have a proposition, a chance for you all to survive this little misunderstanding." Aelren, his instincts screaming caution, exchanged a wary glance with Kiara. "And what would this proposition entail?" The butcher grinned, a chilling display of sharp teeth against the dark canvas of his helmet. "I need a pilot, someone who knows the galactic trade routes, Someone who can get me to a specific location, and I need someone to keep track of my cargo." He gestured towards the still forms of the crew members lying injured on the floor, their bodies bearing the brutal marks of the pirate attack. "You've already taken your cargo. What do you need me for?" Kiara asked, her voice tight with anger. The butcher's smile widened, revealing a chilling glint of his teeth. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, little one. You're the cargo. You're kind, you're worth more alive than dead." A wave of icy fear washed over Kiara, but her eyes met Aelren's, a silent plea for him to say something, anything, to interrupt this chilling conversation. But Aelren was silent, his gaze locked on the butcher, his mind racing, trying to decipher the meaning behind this cryptic offer. The butcher, sensing their hesitation, leaned in, his voice a chilling whisper. "You have a choice. You can die here, along with your friends, or you can live and serve me. The choice is yours." The tension in the corridor thickened. Aelren, his mind swirling with possibilities, knew the decision rested on his shoulders. The butcher's words, however enigmatic, offered a sliver of hope, a chance for survival. But at what cost? He looked down at Kiara, her face pale with fear, and then back at the butcher. He could see the shadows swirling beneath the crimson visor, a hint of desperation, perhaps even regret, lurking beneath the surface. "We accept your offer," Aelren said, his voice firm despite the tremor of fear that ran through him. The butcher's smile returned, a flicker of something akin to triumph in his crimson eyes. "Excellent," he said. "Then let's get started." As the butcher turned away, his bulky figure disappearing into the shadows of the ship, Aelren felt a prickling sensation on his skin, a sense of unease that gnawed at his heart. The butcher's proposition, however twisted, had given them a chance, but the question remained, what exactly had they signed up for? And what lay ahead for them in this chaotic dance of survival and betrayal? The air in the bridge crackled with tension. Aelren stared at the butcher, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The human pirate, who had seemed invincible just hours ago, now stood there, stripped of his bravado, vulnerability etched across his face. "You have a choice, Aelren," the butcher rasped, his voice a low rumble. "You can walk away, take your crew, and leave me to face the consequences. Or you can stay, and we can find a way out of this together." Aelren knew this was more than a simple offer. The butcher, despite his ruthlessness, had never shown any desire for bloodshed. His actions, however brutal, had always been calculated, aimed at achieving his goals without unnecessary casualties. This offer, this fragile plea for understanding, was a testament to the human's desperate need for connection, for a flicker of hope in the face of his bleak reality. Kiara, her eyes wide with alarm, nudged Aelren. "Captain, we can't stay. This is a trap." Aelren swallowed, his gaze flickering between Kiara and the butcher. Fear gnawed at him, a primal instinct screaming for escape. But he also felt a strange pull, a sense of responsibility for this broken man who dared to offer a lifeline. "What do you propose, butcher?" The butcher's gaze, usually steely and hard, softened for a moment. "I need a way out, Aelren. A way to get off this ship, to escape the bounty hunters on my tail." "And what about your crew?" Kiara challenged, her voice sharp. "What about the lives you've taken? Are you just going to abandon them?" The butcher's jaw clenched. "They were lost long ago, Kiara. Do not mistake my actions for sentimentality." "Then what about your own life? What about your freedom?" Aelren pressed, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Freedom is a hollow concept without purpose," the butcher replied, his gaze fixed on the floor. "And purpose, Aelren, is what I am desperate to find." Aelren sensed a truth in the human's words, a genuine yearning for a path beyond the darkness that had consumed him. He knew, in his heart, that the butcher would not be truly free until he confronted his past and found a way to redeem himself. "We can help you, butcher," Aelren said, surprising even himself with the words. "But it comes at a price." The butcher's head snapped up, a faint flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. "What is the price, Aelren? What do you demand?" We demand your word, Aelrin said, his voice gaining strength. Your word that you will never harm another living being again. Your word that you will use your skills and knowledge to help others, to make amends for the past. The butcher stared at Aelrin, the weight of his past reflected in the depths of his eyes. After a long moment of silence, he spoke, his voice low and resolute. I will give you my word, Aelrin. I will honor your request. Aelrin nodded, a glimmer of hope replacing the fear that had gripped him for weeks. This was not an easy decision. This was a chance, a gamble, a leap of faith. Yet, deep down, he felt a flicker of faith in the human's words, a belief that even the heart of the most hardened criminal could be touched by the light of redemption. He turned to Kiara. We're taking a chance, Kiara. A chance on this human, a chance to find a path out of this mess. We can't let fear guide our actions. We need to do what's right, even if it's terrifying. Kiara looked at Aelrin, then at the butcher, her gaze searching for answers. The tension in the bridge was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the risks they were taking. Yet, in the quiet of the command center, a strange hope bloomed. A hope for something new, a hope for a future where even the most dangerous of enemies could find redemption. The weight of their decision, and the consequences yet to be determined, rested heavy on their shoulders. But for the first time in weeks, Aelrin felt a flicker of optimism. They had made a choice that could change their lives, a choice that could redefine the meaning of freedom. And as they set out on this perilous journey towards the unknown, a glimmer of hope for a better tomorrow shone bright.